And we're live streaming. Okay, all right, thank you, Pauline. Good evening and welcome everyone attending this meeting. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so welcome to everyone viewing online. Concerning meeting etiquette, please may I ask that you indicate you wish to speak by raising your physical hand. People online should raise their virtual hand and the screen will be monitored for virtual hands. Please be mindful that as chair I cannot see around how we're sitting, so please be patient if you are not immediately drawn in if you're online. And please direct questions and answers via myself as the chair. Anyone attending remotely must turn on their camera when speaking. Please note that the chat function on Zoom will not be used for questions and answers on the agenda, but you may communicate with the clerk. In addition, if there's any issue with the sound within the meeting room, please let us know. And just for reference, there's only one microphone, so if you do have questions and answers, please speak up, because that's just the one picking up everybody. So this is the first meeting of the municipal year and we have new members. Welcome to those on the committee. I welcome new and returning faces to new members as we consider each agenda item. There is no such thing as a silly question. Please ask whatever question you need to provide the clarification and assurance that you require. If there's anything in the report that you don't understand, please make reference to it. We'll now turn to the agenda. Item 1, election of the Vice Chair for the municipal year. Chair, are there any nominations for the position of Vice Chair to the Audit and Governance Committee for the municipal year? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to nominate Councillor Terry Paul for Vice Chair.
Okay, is there a seconder?
Seconded.
Okay. Are there any further nominations? Okay. There be no other nominations, I will move to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Paul being the Vice Chair of the Audit and Governance Committee for the municipal year, please raise your hand. All those against? Any abstentions? No. I hereby declare that Councillor Paul has been elected to the position of Vice Chair of the Audit and Governance Committee for the municipal year 2025-26. Congratulations, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues.
Item 2, apologies for absence and substitutes. Are there any apologies, Pauline?
There's no apologies. Councillor Chowdhury said he hoped to join online.
Okay.
And I can see Councillor Allen has joined online. But I haven't heard from anybody else.
Okay. We're core anyway, so we'll just note anyone that was due to attend and hasn't attended. Declarations of interest. To those members who are physically present, are there any declarations of interest?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Item 4, minutes of the last meeting. Members are requested to consider and agree the accuracy of the decisions and minutes of the last meeting of the Audit Committee held on the 30th of April 2025. Are there any matters of accuracy? No. Are the minutes agreed?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, action log. The committee is asked to note the contents of the action log. Are there any questions on the action log? Yes, Councillor Paul.
Chair, it's just an action AC 264. It's about the conditions for the exceptional financial support. Obviously, I would have expected, since we've taken the support mechanism from the government, we would know by now what the conditions are for the use or not use of that mechanism. And I wondered, could you update the committee, please? It says for noting,
Yes.
but it's just like you can't get a loan and not know how you're going to.
All right, do you have a response, please?
I think the response is that there is no update. I entirely understand where you're coming from, Councillor Paul, but the fact is that MHCLG have not set out the conditions that will attach. It says ESG, I should point out.
Yeah.
We obviously means EFS. Not set out the conditions that attach to that. other than that they will, if you want to conduct some form of assurance review, the terms of which are not yet known. So I would like to be able to give you a fuller update. That is the update that we have.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any further comments on the action log? Okay. Present in the room, I see by a show of hands as the report noted. Thank you. We'll now consider the substantive agenda item. Item 6, progress made on the LGA peer review action plan. I'm allocating 20 minutes for this item. I'm very grateful to Abby Gabo, the Chief Exec, for attending this meeting online, and ask her to briefly introduce the report, which will be followed by members' questions. Thank you, Abby.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Good evening all. I'm really sorry I couldn't be in the room with you all today. I was on leave today. So as you'll know in the report, there has been progress made against the LJ peer review report since the LJ visited in end of 2023, and then their subsequent visit in October 2024. There are broadly around 7 of the 11 recommendations left to complete, which will be completed by the end of this summer. Some of the areas that are still outstanding in relation to the report are grouped in several areas. Some of the work in terms of member development and member relations, and some further work in relation to workforce culture and organisational culture. We anticipate that the LJ will come and visit in October. We're waiting for a confirmed date for a final peer review visit. And we think that by the time they return, they'll be able to see the progress that the authority has made. Chair, I'll leave it there so that we can have a discussion. I think it will probably be more helpful.
Okay, any questions, please? Sorry, could you just introduce yourself, please?
Hello everyone,
Sorry.
Councillor Thelma Odway, Councillor Dockerson House.
Thank you.
My question is on page 26. It's 4.22, and it talks about how there are discussions with system-wide partners about co-designing solutions to the homelessness, TA and social care packages, like the problems that we're having there. So given that we're having like our most overspend in these areas, is it okay to just expand on who these partners are, what's happening, what's the plan, what these solutions are, when are they going to be, when are they going to come into play, how are they going to help?
Right, forgive me, Councillor. All I could pick up in the sound was like rustling of paper.
Oh.
So they're going to pick up.
Sorry. If one of the officers in the room heard it, they can respond too. It's not just my report.
Sergeant, because of page 26, 4.22, the third paragraph about partners.
Okay. Okay, yes, the third paragraph about partners. So you would have seen that last week that there was a launch of our partner innovation, which was to set out our stall in relation to the boroughs, what you'll know as a local strategic partnership, to think about how we work together around key issues with partners that the borough faces. One of them will likely be temporary accommodation and homelessness. You know that there's some work that's happening with, I think it's UEL or UAL, I always get the universities mixed up, forgive me, around predictive analytics to help us better understand how to navigate and support families earlier. Hopefully I answered the question because I didn't really hear the full question, apologies.
Because it says co-design, the way you described it is as though they're going to like provide advice on what we do, but like co-design, I thought it was like working together. And
Yeah.
I wanted to know if there was any more sort of like specific actions that you're going to do to help tackle these problems.
Yeah, so the co-design is the innovation labs that were launched last Friday by the Mayor, and that's where partners will be working over subsequent months to think about how we work collaboratively to deal with key issues across the borough. So through that will come an action plan and some of the work that we agree to deliver, and homelessness and temporary accommodation will be one of them.
Okay.
Sorry.
Any other questions? Councillor, can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Councillor Melanie Onovo, I'm Mary Landlord. Just on, I think it's page 42, the recommendation of the LGA peer review. obviously this is a partially completed action, but it does detail that the value for money based budgeting exercise. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. The value for money based budgeting exercise was due to be completed June 2025. Though it is for the July finance review, would it be possible to receive an update on this, please?
Yeah, I don't know if Andrew and Conrad are in the room and you'd like to update on the value for money exercise that's been started.
We have started this exercise now, and it will be described and fleshed out a bit so you can see what it involves in the July finance review. It's an approach where we're trying to sort of triangulate some benchmarking data and mapping budgets against outcomes as well. And we've essentially sort of agreed the approach with the cabinet members, and we're going away and doing the work, if you like, particularly on the benchmarking at the moment. So it's part of the approach for budget setting in the MTFS for future years. So that work's underway. It's not complete, clearly from the 30th of June at the moment. So to update you, it's very much a work in progress.
Could I ask a supplementary? Would you be able to explain the cause for the delay? Obviously, by the report which you've submitted to the committee, the exercise will be completed by June 2025. So can you please explain why you've not met this deadline?
Yes, I'll have a go at that, Councillor. We have been having to sort of juggle, I suppose, conflicting deadlines at the same time. So probably not able to dedicate enough time resource on that particular project to complete it in time for June. I mean, it does work. The sort of timelines we're working to now do support the approach for budget setting from the next financial year. So it's dovetailing and working well with that, but we haven't had enough capacity, I suppose, in the finance team to fulfil that deadline as originally envisaged.
Just final comment.
Yes.
Just in the context of the best value notice, though non-statutory, value for money is an integral part of that, and audit of our discretionary spend to ensure value for money and delivery of the council's practice. It's important that this is taken seriously and that there is resource directed to completion of this exercise. I do take issue with the fact that it is incomplete.
So perhaps I could just indulge me, Chair, I'll just talk about what it is that we're doing. So it's an approach to zero-based budgeting, based on where we can find intelligence on services that might not offer the very best value for money. So that's the benchmarking piece. So it's a sort of a broad sweep of available benchmarking information, and we're looking for services where the data may be flawed and may be wrong. And I'm sure we've all experienced that with benchmarking, where the data suggests it's worthwhile doing a detailed piece of work on a zero-based budgeting approach. We really recognise, and you heard me say sort of resourcing capacity issues there, but we can't sort of do a widespread zero-based budgeting for every single service across the council. So the value for money bit is about using good information and intelligence to find areas to then do a zero-based budget, and you can learn a lot from benchmarking peers that you notice are reflecting well, reporting well in the benchmarking data. So talking to other councils about how they do things. But that's the idea. So it's not it's not sort of in the same space, as you like, as the value for money judgment that our external auditors would produce. It's more about an approach to zero-based budgeting for certain services where we think it will pay off the most.
Okay.
I just have a quick question. So now it's revised to the 31st of July. Are you on target to hit the 31st of July deadline?
So 31st of July.
Yes,
Yeah.
revised target date, the 31st of July. So you revised it from June
We won't
today, and so now you've said the
We've done
31st of
We've
July.
done the benchmarking portion, value for money bit. Zero-based budgeting is how you fold into budget setting for 26-27. So that's a process that will carry on beyond the end of July. Of the benchmarking. So
Okay, so what will be completed by the 31st of July? then? Okay, so what proportion of the action is the benchmarking? Are you saying it's 80% and then it's just a 20% left to do on the zero-based budgeting? How does that work? Because you've been given a deadline.
it's very important part. I mean, I've not really thought about it like that, Chair, but it's a good deal, half of the work of that. So
I think it's an important point, Andrew, because the deadline has changed. The council's asked for clarification about why does this happen. You said there's some resources. You say it's feeding into the budget process for 26, 27. So if you've got a deadline, we need to understand what is going to be delivered by that deadline and what that deadline means. Okay? Any further questions, please? Yes, Councillor Paul.
Yeah, Councillor Paul. Abby, my question perhaps can be rolled up in your presentation to the committee, but my one is about the difference between progress and assurance on the LGA peer review given to this committee and to other committees since it was produced. The best value report alludes to issues within the organisation which we weren't perhaps told about in the sort of gravity of the best value notice, especially since the October 2024 progress check. And I wondered, can you say to us, what did the best value people see, which we weren't informed of as we were given assurances of progress and grip?
Thank you, Councillor Paul. So in relation to MHCLG, when they issued the best value notice to the council on, I think it was the 9th of May, they hadn't at that point asked of anything of the council. So the first formal meeting with MHCLG was, I think it was last week, forgive me of the date. It was, I can check it in my diary, but I think it was about a week ago. So forgive me the date, I can confirm the date with the committee. So at the meeting that we met with them last week or so, that's when we provided the evidence. So we provided the evidence in terms of progress against the LJ Action Plan, the work that we've been doing with the Improvement Board, where we are currently with the regulator with social housing, and also the work that we've been doing around the longer term MTFS and that strategy. So there was nothing that was provided to the committee, sorry, not to MHCLG in advance. They had read the documents that you have all seen online at that point to make their judgment. So in relation to where we are as an authority, there are a number of really complex issues that we have been dealing with as a council, which hasn't been hidden from any of the councillors. If there's anything in particular that you're mentioning in the best value that was raised that somebody isn't aware of, I'm happy to respond if you can just point out what that is, Councillor Paul.
No, the only point it mentioned in the report on the recommendation relationship reset, and it refers to 12.2 and refers to legal implications. It just seems from reading the best value notice and reading the LGA report and the progress report, there does seem to be, as I call it, a Venn diagram of issues that seem to merge, looking at the two. And it's quite interesting what you said about MCLG. So essentially they were looking at us from afar. Is that what we
hadn't provided information in advance, Councillor Paul. So we'd met with them for the first time for our formal meeting on whatever date that they invited us about a week ago. Forgive me, I don't have my diary open because I'm only on one screen.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you.
So in relation to relationship reset, what did you ask?
No, the only, there was the recommendation, there was an example. The recommendation in the peer review relates to, for example, relationship reset. Also, the best value notice talks about
relationships.
Well,
yeah.
Just an example, the symbolic has to, there are issues which cut across both areas that approach different things.
Yeah, I don't think we've hidden or shied away as an authority around some of the relationship challenges and the work that we've put in place, which is within the report. The question and query, Councillor Paul, will be how long they take to embed and how long that they will take for the authority to really, really kind of see those changes happen on a longer term basis.
Okay, thank you, Abby.
Okay, Councillor Allen, can you come in? Are you driving? Oh, okay.
No, I'm not driving. I have someone else driving. We just have to go
Okay.
somewhere very important.
Can you introduce yourself, please? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Councillor Akhtarul Alam, I just wanted to ask a simple question. Since the best value issue has been raised, what we have taken on board to do anything about it? What we've done so far?
So I think what councillor's asking is, since the best value notice was issued, what have we done so far?
I think so, yes.
You were breaking up a little bit. So there is a report that will be going to full council on the 14th, which will provide some more detail. So since the council was issued the best value notice on the 9th of May, we have pulled together a overarching delivery plan for the authority, which pulls together all of the key plans that we have. So you've got the social regulator housing plan. You've got the work in terms of the delivery against our improvement plan for the LGA and the progress set there. You've got the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny roadmap that we're also working through. And then there are some smaller improvement journeys that are happening across the piece. So alongside that, what we've made sure that we've done is strengthen the role of our voluntary improvement board that I put in place last summer. And that will really help us to tease against some real critical issues. So the areas that we'll be focusing on will be the most high cost areas for the council at present, which we know are temporary accommodation, housing, children and adults, and also focusing more around governance and relationships going forward and organisational stability. I think for the authority, organisational stability is going to be probably one of the most critical areas over the next 12 months.
So thank you very much for your answer. I just needed to ask you one other question. We have thought there was a discussion about the selling of council assets.
Sorry, Councillor, please could you repeat that? That your connection's not great.
I think something to do with the stabbing. I'm not sure.
Right, can you hear me now?
It's a bit better, but please repeat what you were asking, the question. It's not clear.
Is the plan of selling the council asset still on?
No.
Is it the selling? Did you say selling of the council building?
Yes.
Selling of Dockside, East Cambridge.
Is he asking about what Councillor Paul's asking in relation to EFS in terms of?
He's dropped off the call, Abby. He's dropped off the call.
I think it was to do with selling council buildings, but I'm not sure which one.
I think it's in relation to what Councillor Paul was asking before around EFS and the use of flexible capital receipts and the selling of those properties. I think that's what he was asking, but I think Conrad picked that up in his response.
I mean, I can add a bit on disposals if that's helpful.
Yes, please.
So the council is not relying on borrowing from government for exceptional financial support. It's relying on being able to use the capital receipts from asset disposals to cover day-to-day expenditure. Discussed previously the difficulties of that strategy, more or less that's the position we are in. In terms of our disposal targets, last year, 24-25, target of £16 million realised from disposals was exceeded, and although it is early days in 2025-26 so far, asset disposal will clearly take some time to complete property transactions, but to date, we are making good progress towards realising the disposal figure that we will need to see. So in 2024-5 and 25-6, we expect to be able to hit those disposal targets that form financing for our exceptional financial support.
Thank you. Councillor McCollum.
Thank you, Councillor McCollum. I'm Royal Albert. Chair, when the peer reviewers came in about 2 years or so ago, they spoke of the need for the mayor to divest herself of some of our portfolios or the responsibility in order to and delegate to senior officers and cabinet members. I note in paragraph 5 that it's now scheduled to be done in September 2025. This should have been a quick win. This should have done some time ago to ensure that the council, given the situation that we're in, why is it taking so long? And Abby, can you explain how paragraph 5 is really going to tackle that issue? Because I'm not persuaded by reading the content of paragraph 5 that is going to address the issues
So
that the peer review spoke about.
do you mean which bit of paragraph 5?
Paragraph 5 is speaking about delegation of responsibilities.
Okay, so in relation to, you asked a few questions. I can't answer the first one in relation to when or how the mayor decides to set out her portfolios. It's her choice as the political leader of the organisation. In relation to why it was important at the time of the peer review, it was to ensure that there was a spread in relation to engagement around key issues across the council. And if you remember when they came in, that's one of the things that they flagged, and I think it was flagged also in the CFGS report. Since then, I think the mayor has added several people to her cabinet and changed the portfolios again, and most recently at the annual council meeting, she made further announcements and added a transformation cabinet member.
Councillor Lee,
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I was going to question on the same lines as Councillor McCalman, but Abby, and I appreciate that you can't speak from a political point of view in regards to what the mayor and cabinet are doing and how they choose to do it. But however, the organisation comes under your leadership.
Yeah.
And there are recommendations for a reason. I'm slightly uncomfortable with the answer that was given in regards to where we're currently at. Now, the end of September 2025, I would assume would be around about a year since the peer review.
It would be.
And in my mind, it doesn't take that much longer. It doesn't take that long to absorb yourselves of responsibilities for what are very large portfolios. But I'm not only talking about the mayor. So what I would like to just put on record, we have three cabinet members members that hold multiple portfolios, big portfolios. One of those being the cabinet member for finance, who also has a cabinet member responsibility for transport. I don't know if anyone else would agree or disagree with me, but I thought we was in quite financial, a sticky situation in regards to our finances. And I still don't understand why we're still having the same conversations. I appreciate you may not be able to answer the question, and I'm not asking you to, but maybe this could go back to the mayor's office, because I know on the paperwork it does say the chief of staff, but I thought the chief of staff has no longer existed and was being recruited to. So I just wonder how long we really are going to be watching this specific recommendation continuously go forward. And I guess I wonder how long this will really take.
Yeah. So, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I'll let you finish.
Yeah, and so I just think that I'm not comfortable. We're having the same conversations. I can only assume you're not comfortable having the same conversations about something that you don't have any control over. However, you own this document and you own a lot of what happens in this space. And there was another question I had just quickly. I'll just give my both questions. Recommendation 2, resetting relationship resets.
Yes.
I just wondered, Abby, are those timelines realistic? Are we actually going to meet these timelines? I just feel like since the peer review, and I appreciate things change, things maneuver, things happen, but are these timelines actually realistic? Are we actually going to get to a place where the member to member relationships, the member to officer relationships are really dealt with?
So I'm going to go backwards and forwards if that's okay, Councillor. So I'll start with the first one. So in relation to timescales, in terms of the bits that are outside of my control, I would suggest that the committee writes and asks the question. I can't answer them, unfortunately. The areas that are within my control, you'll see that there has been steady and continuous progress, and there will continue to be. The officers of the council have worked really, really hard in the last, since 23, to really progress what's going on in the action plan, because we believe in the improvement of the organisation. It's always challenging coming into a complex organisation with multiple challenges, but we have stuck to it and continued to move forward. In relation to the relationship reset work, the activity will be completed by the end of September. So we've invested quite a lot to improve those relationships, both between member and officer, and we've had support from the LGA and other organisations to really help us do that. Do I think that all the relationships will change by the end of September? I don't know, because that depends on personalities and individuals. Like any relationship, it will take groups of people, 2 people, individual people, to work collectively to really kind of make sure it beds down. Earlier on, I mentioned something around culture and the ability for culture to bed down in the organisation. So I will make sure, and we have continued to provide all the tools and the opportunities. It will be organisational effort to make sure it beds down and it becomes the culture here in Newham.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Chowdhury is next, please. Councillor Chowdhury?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Put your camera on, please.
Sorry, 1 second.
I can hear you, Councillor Chowdhury. Oops, no, he's gone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank
Sorry,
you.
I'm a bit ill today, so I'm not there. My question is around a point you made earlier around institutional stability. So there's obviously been a lot of change in terms of directors, and to me that presents a quite significant risk in terms of capturing lessons. Can you talk to us about how that risk is being mitigated and how you're ensuring lessons are institutionalized across the organisation for when directors eventually leave?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chowdhury. So yes, so there's a few things in the original IGA peer review report that they asked us to do. They asked us to make some of the directors' portfolios broader and smaller to help with retention, and to think of and to implement a workforce strategy for the organisation. We have done. The organisational redesign is nearly complete. The other bit of work that we're doing through the Workforce and Culture Group, which I chair, which is learning from organisations like Camden, who embedded something called psychological safe organisations, or trauma-informed organisations like Islington did. That's what we are doing here. In terms of stability, I think that is going to take time. It is a challenging place to work. And I think the realities of Newham and us being able to move forward is stability will happen when some of those relationship pieces are stable and in a much better place. So one of the bits of work that we're working with the improvement board on is how do we embed a stable culture and ensure that where we do have gaps, we are quickly recruiting to those and filling them as quickly and swiftly as possible to provide stability for the organisation.
Councillor Chowdhury, does that answer your response?
Can I ask a very quick follow-up? So when people leave, how are you actually capturing lessons from those people?
Yeah, so we do exit interviews. So we've been doing exit interviews since I began. Or since Gordon began, because there was an interim HR director before Gordon for all the senior exits. So that has been being collated and written down so that we know some of the thematic reasons why people are exiting the organisation.
And sorry, Abby, is there any themes occurring through those exit interviews, or are they all quite?
Would it be helpful if I asked Gordon to bring it to the next committee collated for you?
Yes, that would be.
Okay, I can do that. And I know Gordon, I know Conrad's just written it down as a note. I think it's important for the committee to see.
Okay, great. Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, it's just a follow-up on this subject. It is recommendation number 6. The council should develop a clear approach to culture change and organisational development. This should include the introduction of a new workforce strategy, which you have already addressed, but to address issues such as recruitment, retention, induction, EDI, and performance management.
Yes.
In the actions, I didn't really see beyond work continues in this area to develop a clear roadmap for HR improvements, which I can see like with exit interviews, etc., is all great. And I do welcome you saying that we are working on this. There are projects at hand to improve the organisational culture in relation to all of those metrics. But what I'm not seeing is something that is measurable. It's just we don't know how to, as a committee, to see what those improvements look like as a result of all of those distinct actions being taken. And then, that makes it harder for us to do our job as to the effectiveness of these policies that have been introduced, partly as recommendations from the LGA and partly as actions that the organisation has taken itself. So I would just like to know in more detail for you how you how this is measurable. What are the outcomes that you would like to see? What would the organisation look like at the end of these changes? And what are things that we can measure from these projects in place?
Thank you, Councillor. So just to take us back a little bit. So before the LGA came and before I joined the organisation didn't have a workforce strategy and hadn't for a number of years. So it's the first one that's been implemented for some time, and that's why it was raised in the LGA peer review report. There is a comprehensive dashboard that sits behind that we review and track as a leadership team, which looks at organisational stability. So we know that the biggest movement is in the top 2 tiers of the organisation, so chief exec, corporate director. So there's significant amounts of work that needs to be done there, and what is causing some of that instability at that level. It also tracks down into the organisation to look at reasons why people are sick or off. So we're dealing with things like high levels of stress, which we're working on. We've got I can't remember what it's called, but there's some work that's happening with HROD around what that looks like for the organisation. The work that's described in here, which is my concern, is around HR capacity for the organisation. When you're doing a significant amount of work in this space around workforce, around culture, around stability, we need to make sure that the organisation is robust. I know Gordon presented this morning to my CLB what that roadmap and plan will look like. And I think alongside the work that will come potentially in terms of the exit interviews, I think it's fine for you to see the dashboard and to look at what that roadmap looks like so that you can track it alongside the organisation.
Thank you, Annie.
Okay, Councillor Paul.
Just a very quick supplementary is
Sorry, Councillor Paul, can you speak a little bit louder for me?
Sorry, just supplementary. One of my colleagues asked about HR, and you mentioned Gordon coming back. It was an issue I was going to mention when we get to the draft accounts, but there is an alarming figure in that account where somebody has received more in a payoff than they actually get paid in salary. And what I'm wondering is how robust is our HR system where potentially we exit without payoff, and at what circumstances we use a payoff mechanism. So it'd be useful when Gordon comes back, not to have a narrow focus on HR, we haven't got enough professionals, blah, 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 but the outcomes of a subpar, if I can use that word, HR both at the moment, it does seem we might be using payoffs as a HR tool rather than doing HR. I'll raise it when we get to the specific issue when we get to the account, it's very in the back, but I just want to raise it now. It's pressing me, raise it now, because you mentioned the action point Gordon.
That's helpful, Councillor Paul, and I'll ask Conrad as a corporate director of resources where HR sits to work with Gordon to bring back a robust report for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions before we move on? Okay. The recommendation is to note the report and progress made. May I see by a show of hands if the recommendation agreed? Thank you. Item 7, Treasury Management Year-End Report. I'm allocating 20 minutes for this report. I invite Andrew Ward to briefly introduce the report, which will be followed by member questions. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. So today, or tonight, we have the Treasury Management Year-End Report. So it's largely a actual report detailing the performance of Treasury Management across the last year. I would like to just thank the team for preparing this report. One of the things also online may be able to assist with questions this evening. So, Chair, if I may, so Zakia is a product of our training scheme through the graduate system to bring people and train them to qualify recipients. That's a subject that has previously been raised by the Audit Committee, and I just wanted to successful product on basis. I'm very pleased with the work.
With an acorn, you've grown.
So the succession planning is working. Okay, well done, Saki.
So the report sort of shows that the amount of our borrowing has increased. So at the start of the year it was just under 1.1 billion. It's now 1.4 billion. The temporary borrowing has gone down, our long-term borrowing has increased. So it's all in accordance with the treasury management strategies which were laid out and approved as part of the budget setting process for 24-25. In fact, if you look at the prudential indicators on borrowing, in Appendix 1, you'll see that the council's performing well within those prudential indicators. Those prudential indicators being set in line with the approved capital programme. So yes, there are some big numbers here, but it's made up for it's been taken for the purposes of achieving the approved capital programme. In fact, a lot of the borrowing here relates to activity in the HRA, it's consistent with the HRA capital programme and the HRA business plan and provision and maintenance of funds within the HRA. Just to leave it at that.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Andrew, for the report. My question is more of a strategic question about borrowing. We've got worsening economic conditions. Interest rate cuts are not going to come through. The Bank has reversed trajectory. Inflation is rising. Growth is 0.8 or 0.7%, basically zero. And the economy is getting worse. Debt is being more expensive. We've got large amounts of debt on our balance sheet. What measures have you taken if we get a significant move in the market conditions, but aim to protect the council? What plans have you got to do to jump some of the debt if we have to? Because if the debt goes up, we could pay more money. And how much of our debt is fixed?
So principally we borrow long term. I will get you precise proportion of debt that's fixed if you look at the council balance sheet, for example, of that 1.4 billion figure. A shade over 1.3 is long term and therefore fixed. You don't borrow that on variable rates. Ours, you may remember, some complicated loans as part of that degree of variability. The point is, fundamentally what we do and have done for the last few years is borrow on long-term fixed rates. So rising interest rates is of course an issue for the housing and development programme, and indeed has made viability challenges particularly problematic for new developments, but existing debt, subject to all the sort of caveats you'd expect them to make it, it's affordable and it's built into our budgets and so on. In terms of what we could do if we wanted to fundamentally change that debt figure, so obviously one thing would be to cease new borrowing, which would gradually see the figure drop down over time. A more substantial action that could be taken would be to dispose of those assets that are disposable. So some of the debt will relate to schools, roads, sort of depot, operational buildings that you can't sort of get out of, you just have to reprovide them somewhere else. There is the housing portfolio, again, long term, and remember discussions about housing company Popular that the council wholly owns, and that around about 90% of its debt is met by the value of the properties that is now built. There's always a bit of a lag between that and the companies doing some further housing development and all the elements of that, but it's creating quite a degree of comfort over that particular element of the debt. But I think the key part of your question was around sort of exposure to future interest rate changes, and that is much more of an issue for new developments versus indeed making it challenging rather than our existing debt.
Small stop.
Yes, yes.
You took my second question, which is about popular. That's where
I'm just going to guess where you're going.
you did, yeah. So predictable. So that is the risk at the moment of the council. And I haven't seen anywhere in any papers like a lock to say if the rate went at this point, we would pause our development. It seems to be we're just chugging ahead, and we're chugging ahead based on rates set 18 months ago, a year ago. Rates are getting more expensive, and I wondered what's the assurance for members and residents that there's a point where we take that mature decision to say, you know what, the market conditions are really, really bad. Yes, we had an approach to say it's going to replace people in temporary accommodation, reduce our bill, blah, blah, blah. But the costs of the market are so greater now, we're going to pause. And the reason I say that, even the government itself has had to pump more capital into its house building program because of the ways of the market. We haven't got that ability, our ability to pause. And I just want to see where the safety valve is, where we are taking those decisions and say, this quarter, it's not too good, go pause, rather than chugging on.
Okay, so 2 or 3 points to make on that. So firstly, when we praise new developments, we don't use historical interest rates. Every quarter we update and then base the interest rate on which we praise new developments on the last quarter's long-term 50-year works very important rate with a margin added to that. A long-term 50-year rate doesn't change that much that rapidly, or hasn't done. I suppose there are economic circumstances where it could do. So assurance, first of all, that we base investment decisions on pretty current interest rates, and we don't try and update it every day or anything like that. You know, private equity firms need that approach to do it. It's correct. We don't have a sort of absolute figure that says, you know, if interest rates went beyond X, we would just stop all development. I think that's probably the right way to approach it, because there are, you know, if you make a rule like that, you often then find yourself getting caught out because something else will also have changed. You know, there are a number of competing factors in that. But I think the important assurance that the committee has is that all new investment, for example, major regeneration schemes or housing acquisitions, always goes through the cabinet process. And so at each point in that, not just here's an enormous budget for an entire scheme, broken down by phases, by contracts, and so on. So there is plenty of opportunity for visible scrutiny of those decisions, and indeed some of those decisions have been called in by the Open Scrutiny Committee in order to provide that check that down.
Okay, Councillor, please.
Sorry, my question's slightly different, and it might require you to do just a little bit of explaining for me.
Sure.
So, you know, I'm just going through the numbers. Actually, you know, a lot of our the debt that we do hold long term comes to maturity far down the line. But I think my question is more on our capital expenditure. And particularly in relation to the fact that, I don't know if you would correct me here, it seems like we have slightly lower capital expenditure, but our debt liabilities seem to be rising, even though that's the case. Is that correct or not?
Yes, I mean, our capital programme is funded by a combination of government grants, contributions from developers, and borrowing. You know, it's fundamentally, there are other bits of margins. So although the capital expenditure in 24/5, for example, was a bit less than the previous year, nonetheless there was a significant element of that was funded by borrowing. And so you would expect to see borrowing rise. We are required under something called minimum revenue provision to set money aside each year for the repayment of principal on the debt, effectively mortgage repayments. If you don't mind the analogy, at a rate usually between 2 and 4% of the debt, according to the nature of the debt. Again, there are some complexities around that. So we are making provision as we go for repayment of existing debt, but you would expect to see our borrowing figure rise because the council's financial strategy has been to fund long-term regeneration programmes and housing acquisitions for a variety of reasons, mainly which are political and social in nature, but also financially, particularly when you look at housing acquisitions, because those actually cut the costs of our temporary accommodation bill once all the cost of capital and so on is taken into account. So, if you like, what you're seeing in terms of the debt rising is a conscious part of the financial strategy. Now, of course, it will be open to the council to adopt a different financial strategy on that. We have discussed part of that. One thing I should add on that, maybe to develop the point I made earlier in response to Councillor Paul's question, the long-term regeneration schemes at the moment, this is not fixed, but at the moment they are predicated on an assumption that we will retain the private unit. So in regeneration schemes, you build some of it for social housing and some of it for private housing because you've got to pay for the social housing. At the moment, we plan to retain that because we think it gives us better ability to maintain the right kind of place, and the long-term rentals for that will over time pay for the debt. An alternative strategy that we're going to have to look at, because of the various debt issues that we discussed here, is whether we should instead look to sell those private units. Obviously that realises you capital more quickly and therefore gets your debt down. Clearly it also then has consequences for the council's ability to maintain the kind of place that we want, and you're swapping different sorts of financial risks. So it's a complicated decision, but there would be an option there as part of that to change our financial strategy, which would certainly change the profile of debt going forward. Quite a lot in that answer. I may not have dealt with all of your questions, but let me pause there.
So our capital expenditure has fallen proportionately, but borrowing as a proportion of that capital expenditure has increased.
No, I didn't intend to give you that impression,
okay.
So apologies if I did. I just meant that a proportion of the capital programme is always funded by borrowing, and therefore, given the scale of the capital programme, that outweighs the amounts that we set aside for repayment of debt. So you would expect to see debt rising. That's a conscious part of the financial strategy.
Okay. Just my only supplementary is what you think. I guess it's dependent on the options in which you gave, which was to either sell off some of that stock to be able to bring the debt down, or sorry, could you explain this? The option 2, it was.
So, if you imagine, let's just imagine a scenario. We'll simplify it for purposes of discussion. We're doing the Carpenter's estate regeneration, as is well known. Capital cost of that over 15 years will be somewhere around 1.5 billion or more. Half of that is for affordable housing, half of it is for private housing. Current strategy is we hold on to private housing, we let it out at market rates, and we use the surplus on that to repay the debt over time.
Yeah.
The alternative strategy would be when we build them, we sell them, and then you get your debt down much more quickly. You have a different set of financial risks that go with that, and also the consequence of it, of course, is the council then has less influence over the place that it's built in the future. So those would be the factors for consideration in that. But we're actively thinking about it. We have not yet made a decision because, of course, the actual completion of the units on Carpenter is some time on.
That's fine. I'm not unhappy with what I saw in the figures, but within our legal limits, I do think that it is within this remit of this committee to think long term as well. That's why I wanted you to clarify that.
The discussions about financial strategy and the borrowing strategy were really important. So,
thank you. Thank you, Councillor, for one second.
Just a great question by my council colleague there. In the report, you mentioned that the slippage our slippage is due to optimism bias. And I would want to know, where is that bias located? Is it in finance? Is it in regen? Bear in mind the conversation we had about LGA peer review and culture change. How is that culture change being addressed to ensure we spend our capital more efficiently? So the report actually says there's slippage with no explanation as to source, how to fix it, what's being done, how to mitigate. There is a cost to our having slippage. So I just want to know who holds the solution to our optimism bias and who's responsible for fixing it.
I'll start on that. Thank you, Councillor. So we will have, indeed, we pretty much finished it, the full detail of the capital outturn as part of the July capital reports last week. Go to July. So there is quite a lot of detail in there about what happens. It does contain a bit of information that's sort of historical then. So there is a pattern of capital budgets are set, but the outturn figures do not reach those budgets. So there is clearly something. I suppose you're alluding to something sort of systematic in that. I mean, capital projects are big. They are, by their very nature, they can be unpredictable in terms of the timing. So I think that's part of the question. The numbers get sort of profiled across the years. We plan capital projects across a number of years in many cases.
Do you actually know the departments and teams and officers who are creating slippage by employing optimism bias in their planning assumptions?
I think we observe it as a phenomenon across the public sector, certainly in where budgets are set, and we are unable as an organisation to spend within those profile budgets. That's clearly evident.
Could I ask capital and actions? There's a two-faced action here. One is for the LGA. I would like to see the LGA, looking at the report, in the LGA peer review report, there's nothing there which is quite saying optimism bias in our capital strategy. This is how we're fixing it. There are 4 different layers. These are these sliders, and it cuts off these recommendations. I think for the LGA peer review report, there's a richer paragraph that needs to be written to solve that, and it needs to be breaking down barriers. Perhaps in your July report, it's not your sort of millstone on your neck, but it's over here. Perhaps you could allude to it in your report and say there is an issue of slippage. It is being addressed by X, Y, Z, and perhaps you can talk to Abigail about the linkages between the two. Because from your answer, yeah, you know where it is. I'm not sure if the solution is in your gift. And what I really want to know is what the solution is. We can't go on historically always slipping back up.
Councillor, so I'm very happy to take that suggestion where we've got it on that. I mean, I don't want to feel like I sort of should round out the answer a little bit. I mean, clearly there are good reasons for slippage as well. Projects just can't be achieved. You want to simply spend the money just to try and achieve a budget figure. That absolutely doesn't happen. So projects progress individually for good reason, but can we do better? I'm thinking about profiling.
Yeah, it's not actually you, because you get the money into the organisation, make sure it's proper control. Perhaps somewhere within the organisation, in regen or whatever, something there is not working. That needs to work better for you to deploy the capital efficiently. I just want to see there's a read across the two.
Thank you, Councillor.
Kristen said her question's been answered.
Okay. All right. Any further questions?
I have a question which is probably explaining again. So page 73 and 74 and 75, can you just explain the liability benchmark and why the general fund goes down over time, but HR doesn't?
That's in the appendices, isn't it?
So page 74 and 75 of the main.
That's more that's the liability benchmark.
So the liability benchmark goes down, but
So for the general fund, it goes down over time. but the HRA one doesn't.
Oh, I see, yes.
Yes, with the, and that sort of reflects the longer and ongoing nature of the HRA business plan. That they'll always anticipate that there will be, so the general fund one is only sort of populated with the approved capital programme for the next few years, and then because there isn't anything beyond that, it ends up coming down in terms of, we don't know what we're going to build beyond the sort of timeframes of the general fund capital programme. With the HRA, it's ongoing ongoing fund within the council, given we anticipate always having 16,000 odd or so many homes. There'll always be a need to create new homes and to maintain and refurb homes. So there's a sort of basically an assumption that we'll always be spending capital monies on the HRA, whereas the general fund is sort of limited by the horizons of what's been planned. I think if I make out it's a really good question and sort of points out some of the flaws, I guess, in the liability benchmark. But this is a sort of set for good practice to put the liability benchmark.
No, I agree. I think it's a fair point, isn't it? It is true that because we've got 16,000 houses, there are houses in the HRA, there are tools out there that enable you to make long-term estimates of the likely capital cost of maintaining them, and therefore we build that into the budget. So the HRA budget is a lot more long-term than the general fund budget. But practical reality is we know that graph 2 in the real world won't actually look like that, because in 10 years' time we'll have thought of new things that we want to invest in within the general fund. It's just we can't really reflect those. We don't yet know what they are, whereas on the housing side we do kind of know pretty much what the cost of maintaining the council stock will be. So I think you've rightly pointed out the limitations of this graph 2 on page 74 of the principal agenda that's the problematic one, isn't it? There's a limit to the usefulness of that information, whereas graph 3 on the housing revenue account is a more realistic estimate of long-term capital costs.
So in reality, it might not necessarily go down. Over the years, you decide to do other things, and it might change on this one.
Exactly. So if all we do is deliver the approved capital programme and nothing else, that is what would happen. We kind of know that isn't what would happen. We don't know what else would happen in order to put a different figure in there.
If I may, the chart is more helpful the closer you are to the left-hand side of it. So, it obviously rises quite steeply, I should say.
And the second graph, like where the line is sort of dead straight, that doesn't assume sort of constant. There's still movement, like.
I think there's a sort of broad assumption of just a continual uniform amount of HRA, but that really.
Okay, final question.
Not questions, just clarification.
Okay.
Just because the HRA fund is ring-fenced amount and it can't move anywhere else. So I assume that creates a stasis of ceteris paribus, that you know how much and how much stock you have and potentially how much you spend over time. So that creates a...
You've got kind of more certainty because you've just got one sort of asset and you know roughly what it's going to cost each year and so on. In reality, the HRA plans will develop over time. As Andrew says, I kind of look more to the left of the graph. By 2082, when the graph sort of runs out, that's 50 odd years hence now. A lot of things will have changed by then. We just don't know what they are, so it's just the best available information.
Okay, I'm going to draw this item to a close. So the committee is asked to note the Treasury Management Outturn 2024-25 report, including the final position on the prudential indicators as indicated in Appendix 1. Now, I see by a show of hands if the report noted, please. Thank you. Item 8, going concern. I'm allocating 15 minutes to this item. I'll invite mainly the board to briefly introduce the report, or Andrew, will then be followed by questions. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. So for a number of years now, we've brought a going concern assessment to a report on the council's going concern status to the June Audit Committee. And some members will be sort of more familiar than others, I suppose, with the report. Certainly, if you go back more than a few years, I don't think many councils gave a lot of thought to producing or assessing their going concern status. As the financial squeeze on councils progressed, you start to see more detailed reports such as these being put together. More recently in them, the reports have shown that we believe there are that the council has resources and access to resources, be they reserves or the budget set, to continue operating for 12 months, 18 months. That's the sort of time frame in question here. And then clearly in 24-25, the budget was balanced on an assumption of use of capital receipts under the EFS programme. So this report does talk about the EFS approach. And actually, I apologise really if it gets too sort of philosophical, but it sort of starts to talk about the nature of authorities. There's not been any government instruction anywhere in the country for a council to cease its activities. Therefore, they are of course a going concern. I think discuss that's perhaps an essay question, which I'm sure some colleagues around the room would love to join in at some point. But for the moment, we do believe there are sufficient earmark reserves, general reserves, and access through the EFS programme to consider the council going concern.
Okay, any questions, please? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, I don't want to enter theological debate, but reading this, there's an assumption that council will go on, right? And that is an assumption I don't particularly buy into. And the reason why I say that, I think the government will let councils go bust, or the economic conditions and demographic conditions will make councils go bust. So number one, I think I want to challenge the orthodoxy of the status quo will always be here, because that's where you're getting problems. Look at our current situation in temporary accommodation. That was the same philosophy taken years ago, and look where we are. And also, you can only sell things off once. So we've got the EFS. The price of the other hat on outside commercial property is going through the roof. And if it is stable, it's got to be in the right location. Newham is not the centre of the King's community in London, or if not Europe. So again, what happens if we don't solve the problem and we burn through the EFS money? What happens if we sell everything off? What happens if we won't solve our temporary accommodation problem? Maybe I would like to see a little bit of Cassandra in the report, rather than it's going to be all right on the night. But the problem with the way it's written, if it goes really bad, what this report shows, perhaps we haven't thought about the tough decisions we need to make to keep the show on the road. And the reason why I say that, the Chancellor is having a few issues with our economy, and they've got thousands of people doing it. And there's a fundamental difference, debate now about the future of the UK economy. Our place of that will change. So really what I'm saying is, I'd like to see a little bit more Cassandra, a little bit of what if these things don't turn right, what goes? Because at the moment, I don't see our temporary accommodation problem being solved in the next 5 years.
Could I start on
Yes,
that, and then Andrew will want to come in? I think it's just really important to be clear about the purpose and limitations of this report. It is not intended to be the council's long-term financial strategy, that's the budget report. What it's doing is reporting at a point in time the reserves available to the council and therefore demonstrating the contention that, yes, the council would still be here in 12, 18 months' time. As Andrew says, when there is a sort of general, more than general presumption, that requirement really from government, and indeed backed up by CIPFA and others, that there aren't circumstances in which the council would cease to be a going concern in the accounting sense, not least because it is theoretically possible. Political practicality might be very different, but it is theoretically possible to double council tax or whatever it would take, and therefore, in theory, any council in any situation could be in a position where it would continue to be a going concern in that narrow accounting sense. So we use this report as a way of just setting out here, these are the reserves currently available to the council. So that's a good sort of point in time record to provide. It doesn't imply any complacency, that it doesn't pick up budgeting points and so on, because that's not its purpose, and we will do that. You will see that set out in the July Financial Review and in the subsequent budget reports to it. To the wider point, absolutely is an issue right across the sector about, as I see it, the mismatch between the duties placed on councils and the funding made available to them. So, one success story at Newham, actually, the national figures now for special educational needs, the deficit on that gap between costs of providing what the legislation requires and the funding made available. I think the national figure is now of the region of 5 billion. I was trying to explain to a friend of mine yesterday that government had legislated to say that we can pretend that that doesn't exist, and he didn't understand it, despite being quite financially literate, and I get his point. But Newham has actually reduced its deficit of that now to the low millions. Most councils that we've seen that have reported so far this year have seen their deficits on that special educational needs service double. So, that is just illustrative of the scale of the problem in local authorities, which, as I say, I think is best characterised by successive governments, successive groups of civil servants, if you prefer apolitically, failing to match legislative requirements with the funding available. But, the wider points that you make, I don't, I'm not saying they're wrong or anything like that, but they are beyond the scope of this report in fairness.
Okay. Colson had her hand up.
Hello, hi. I just congratulations on the success story. I think we should congratulate you when something's done right, and well done for doing that right. I echo some of Councillor Paul's comments on the outlook of this. I mean, if you think about it, and I understand it's a 12 to 18 month outlook, and at a snapshot, you would say that it is a going concern. But when you think about looking at the projected financial position, the control environment, the current financial position of spending 16 million in capital receipts and then still a significant 41 million overspend in that area, adults having a 10 million overspend, children's having a 6.7 million overspend. Is this likely to die out in 25, 26? That's my first question. So then is next year going to be a similar situation, or are we going to have something in place to get rid of those? And my second question, and I think we've talked about this before, is that the earmark reserves are continually being dipped into. Is there a need to review the reserves and what they're being used for? Otherwise, what is the point of earmarking them? Because we're constantly then dipping into them anyway.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for those questions. So, like to sort of echo what Conrad said earlier, that this report shouldn't be read in sort of isolation. I'm sure it hasn't been from all the other budget setting and MTFS financial reports that we've brought through to council, cabinet and audit committee as well. So in the budget setting, we went to great lengths really to sort of demonstrate that there was uncertainty on temporary accommodation, and to demonstrate the assumptions made on why we have budgeted what we have budgeted for the current financial year, so that's for 25-26. So we believe we've made reasonable budget assumptions for the year. That required putting a lot of growth into the budget in key areas, and you mentioned some of them. So that was adult social care, children's, but most of all into temporary accommodation. So we're not anticipating or expecting sort of overspends against the budget set in 25-26 that we've seen in the last couple of years because of all the work that went into setting those budgets. Now, obviously, the budget for 25-26 has been based on the use of approximately £50 million of capital receipts. We have capital receipts that we can use for that. There is a disposals programme to replenish those capital receipts. Clearly, you cannot sell assets more than once, and that point's been made, and we do absolutely understand that. But come back to the sort of time frame of the report. I think I misspoke a little bit earlier, so it's more 18 to 24 months, 12 to 18, which was lost. And there's sufficient resources to sustain that budget for that period. And I think good reason to believe that the budget set won't result in those sorts of overspends that we've seen. Wrong, we're fairly early in the financial year, but there's a lot of work that's gone into the budget setting process to avoid that. You also mentioned about, if reserves are earmarked and then they get sort of utilised and used. Absolutely, that's a helpful point to pick up on. It's the sort of capital financing reserve which has been used to cover the overspend in 24-25, not holding a large reserve like that, and clearly it's come down quite dramatically, quite quickly over the last couple of years. It's certainly part of what we have to think about when considering financial risk for the authority. It's clearly part of that picture. And as we spoke about earlier, the capital projects that are being pursued need to be financially viable in order to progress.
Is that okay, Colson?
Yes. Just a couple of follow-up points. One of them would be that. So you're saying that for the 25-26 budgeting, you think you're on track, or you will be on track to meet the budgets. Does that suggest that last year something exceptional happened whereby you budgeted but you managed to overspend in nearly every area? So did something happen in the 24-25 year that you weren't expecting?
Yes, it did, and actually it sort of started in 23-24 and wasn't sort of, we learned from this, fully addressed in the budget setting for 24-25, and what has happened is the number of households in temporary accommodation has increased each and every month, around about 50 extra households each and every month across those sort of 18-month period. So the demand basically has very steeply increased for temporary accommodation, so we've had that increase in demand, and we've also had a steep increase in the prices that we have to pay for nightly booked temporary accommodation, which is about half of the 7,500 households in temporary accommodation. And the kind of annual price increases we were facing in those markets are of the order or have been of the order of 20%. So, well above CPI inflation at any point in that.
Okay, so just a final follow-up. So you believe then that you've now got the situation under control such that this year's budgeting is in, like, we're not going to have the same conversation this time next year where why were there so many overspends? We didn't forecast this, we didn't forecast this. Sorry about that. I just wanted to clarify.
Absolutely. I'll start. I think Conrad wants to come in. I believe we've got a much more robustly and transparent budget that's been put together for temporary accommodation. So it's looked at recent experience, like I just described, increase in demand, increase in cost, and it has put together reasonable assumptions to base that budget on There's no sort of optimism bias in that budget. So that's what I believe. You know, we cannot wish I could forecast sort of inflation for future years. I'd do very well, I imagine, if I did that. But we can't sort of. There's no crystal ball guarantee, and I do believe we have a much more robust budget put together this time.
Just to add to that very briefly, we're just finalising the results for Q1, doing a forecast. It's early in the year, but the draft that we're working to at the moment shows a small underspending against the budget. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, I was just about to ask a question, Conrad, and came in, so maybe preempt what I was going to ask about the management accounts. Are you saying that it's showing an underspend?
Yes.
Okay. And that includes temporary accommodation and for everything? Okay. Because I know, Andrew, that you are very optimistic and bold in your statement, and
Doesn't sound like me, Councillor.
I welcome your boldness, Andrew, and I hope to see that come true in by period 4, 5, 6, and so. Chair, I wish I was as bold as Andrew, given my experience. But you know what? Maybe Ian Conrad has got some rabbit out of the bag that they're putting out.
Put information, Chair, about the temporary accommodation.
Yes.
Scrutiny predicted the number of presentations going back 2 years ago.
That's true.
We predicted this in scrutiny. 12 plucky amateur campaign councillors did our own analysis, our own number crunching, and our numbers were better than the housing department. I remember it got quite testy. The housing department were quite, how can I put it, forceful in refuting that figure. Now we turn around now, scrutiny was on the money. So you say you got better processes or whatever. I will say you need to look at in housing, how they, because that's where the problem is. Housing got it wrong. They were told they got it wrong. And I think they did it to balance their budget, if I could be so bold, right? And I think hopefully we'll never go back to those days again. But if you have that grip in that area, that'd be quite useful. And scrutiny, we've got the receipts on this. So I do welcome your boldness, and it sounds like there's a new regime in it. I thought it's important.
Okay, thank you.
It's just on the same point, recognising that there is a, 157 million over the next 3 years budget gap. It just takes one miscalculation for that gap to become overspend, and then we're in serious trouble. You've cited that there's no optimism bias in the way that the budget has been set. I know this is not what this item is, but you are saying this whole conversation is on the crux of what is an assumption that this council will last into the future, which I feel doesn't take full account of the financial situation. So given that, maybe nobody can really predict what could happen in the future. I know members have said how scrutiny had pointed out a potential issue of temporary accommodation in the past, but how much does budget setting processes take into account unforeseen variable costs? And how do you take that in? Like, how can you say that there is no optimism bias? What's your calculus in saying that, given the circumstances do suggest that we may be in some trouble?
Let me start with that, and then Andrew will want to add, I'm sure. But budgets are estimates. The council spends about £1.5 billion a year, and so the process of budgeting is not a precise science. For the key budgets, so temporary accommodation, social care are the obvious ones. There's a lot of sort of detailed modelling work that goes on behind the scenes. The summaries of which, and when I say summaries, I mean several pages long minimum, all form part of the report to council on which the budget was set.
Yeah. So,
if you take the temporary accommodation example, for instance, it not only just said, well, we think there will be this many cases of accepting new homelessness duty a month. But it explained why we based that, what the data we based that on. For example, experience in previous years, for instance. It explained what the consequences would be. It is only an estimate, so if we're wrong by 5%, this is what that would translate to financially. So, that's all out there, to be examined as part of the budget making process. I do just, re-emphasise the point. They are estimates. We can't precisely know how many people are going to need social care or whatever, and so your budget has to include estimates of those. That's why it also includes some contingency sums to deal with the fact that no matter how good you are, you will get some of those estimates wrong because it's just impossible to be perfectly accurate. I don't want to add to that.
Final point, please.
Okay. Well, budget setting very much is a process. Scrutiny, a really helpful, useful part of that process, as we've seen. I think that's part of the results we're getting with more robust thinking behind the budgets and more reasonable. We've got good reason to believe there are reasonable budgets in place.
Okay, we're going to finish with a bit over on time on that. Okay. The committee is recommended to note the contents of the going concern assessment as summarised in the report. May I see by a show of hands is the report noted? Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Item 9, draft external audit report. I'm allocating 20 minutes to this item. The committee is asked to comment upon or make recommendations to the Corporate Director of Resources on the level of assurance provided by the plan. My first comment is, sorry, the committee is asked to comment on or make recommendations to the Corporate Director of Resources on the level of assurance provided by the plan. So, what is the process for auditing opening balances if the closing balances from the previous year have not been signed off because of what has happened with the backstop and everything like that?
So, Chair, would it be sensible if Hayley from EY would start off and introduce the report and then
Yeah, no, thank you. So if I just introduce myself briefly. So my name is Hayley Clark. I'm an audit partner from Ernst & Young. And I've picked up the signing responsibility for the external audit opinion this year from my predecessor, Stephen Reid. I've got Karen with me today, who's the senior manager on the audit, but we'll also present the pension fund document, which is also included. So if I present the first document, maybe pause, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so I'll just pull out a few highlights from our report and then happy to take any questions. So within the executive summary, we've identified a number of audit risks as we've gone through our planning procedures. Some of these will look familiar for those of you that have seen our audit planning documents previously. So we kick off with the first three around misstatements due to fraud and error. There's a risk of fraud in expenditure recognition, there's a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Under auditing standards, we are required to consider those risks on every engagement, not just for Newham or local government. We're required to consider them for all audits that auditors undertake and determine where we think the risk is most likely to lie. So those are the areas that we've highlighted for the council. The expenditure risk is focused around inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure, which is essentially where the organisation may seek to take expenditure that would sit in the income statement and move it onto the balance sheet, and therefore you would be releasing that through depreciation over the future years, and therefore there'd be no hit on the general fund. So that's an area that we always have a particular focus on, where there's an organisation that has a large capital programme. We've also got a number of risks included in the plan around the valuation of the council's estate, and we split them out depending on whether they are carried out at market rates, whether they're at depreciated cost, or whether actually they're council values which are done under a set methodology. So we've split those out across the document to evidence the different risks associated with those balances. We also, when we're assessing risk, we also look at other key estimates in the financial statement. So there's a risk in here around pension fund valuation and liability reported to the books. And then we've included a number of other matters throughout. So one's around recoverability of loans that have been provided to your subsidiaries. We've previously experienced some challenges around bank reconciliations, so we've highlighted that as a risk in the plan. IFRS 16, which is the new leases standard, that's new for this year, so we've identified that as an area of risk. And then we've also identified one around the exceptional financial support, which is around disclosures included in the financial statements as an area of focus. And also there's been a return of planning powers from LLDC back out to the boroughs this year as well, so we're focusing on that. So that's a snapshot of the risks that we've identified in the plan. We've also set out our levels of materiality. So plan materiality is the level which external stakeholders might be interested in. Now that at the moment has been set at 1.8%, which is consistent with previous years. However, Karen and I are just going through a process internally to consider additional risk factors that have come to light. One is around the exceptional financial support, and the other is the non-statutory best value notice as well, and the impact that might have and the expectation of external stakeholders. So there is a possibility that level may decrease. If that happens, we will of course alert Conrad in first instance, and then we'll give an update to the committee. Within the document, we also set out our value for money approach. Now, I think it might be helpful just to clarify our work in this area and the scope of that work. So when we undertake value for money procedures, we're looking at whether the organisation has proper arrangements in place to secure value for money, not necessarily confirming that you have achieved value for money. So that's an important distinction just to make in the context of how you read our reports. We're undertaking our planning procedures and our risk assessment procedures on that. However, there are a number of areas that we've highlighted in the plan as risk areas with significant weaknesses. The first is around financial sustainability. We have the governance arrangements around your subsidiaries, the governance arrangements associated with housing, particularly with C4 rating that you've had in previous years, statutory accounts preparation and audit. There's one around the planning powers, and then the last one that's not in the document, which we have added subsequently, is the non-statutory best value notice. So they'll be the areas that at this stage we'll be looking at to ensure there's no significant weaknesses or progress against ones that we've previously raised. And then lastly, I'll just briefly touch on the audit timeline. So the audit will start in September. The backstop date that has been set out is the 27th of February, so we need to issue an opinion by that time next year. There is a mention in the covering paper around rebuilding of assurances, and that's linked to the previous disclaimer of opinions that have been issued on the financial statements. There has been guidance that's been issued on that recently, mainly focused on how we work collaboratively to ensure assurance provided over the reserves figure, which is the most tricky figure to rebuild assurances over. So we're working through that, and we'll speak to Conrad and the team around what that approach might look like and the timelines around that. However, I did just want to emphasise that we are already looking to rebuild assurances. So every year that we manage to complete plan procedures across balances within the financial statements, we're working towards a natural rebuild of assurances that we can provide in the future. But we'll bring back to the committee more information on that in due course. I'll pause there if that's okay, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Bean.
Sorry, just clarification over in the context section, the discussion over the backlog and what's going on there. I just want to know what that.
Yeah, so up until September last year, there was a very large volume of financial statements that were outstanding and hadn't yet had audits conducted on them. Government put statutory backstop dates in place. Yeah. The first one was in December last year, so all historic audits up to 22-23 were issued by that backstop date, are in a handful across the country. And then the next backstop date for 23-24 accounts was February, just gone. So we're now back into almost normal running order. It's a gradual build back, I guess, on date. So it's February this year, then it moves to January, then it goes to November. Is it November? Yeah, then it goes to November. One would assume the ultimate goal might be to get it back to September, but we'll see where that goes. A few years off yet.
Thank you, that's all.
Yeah, it's just the comment you made about rebuilding back assurances, and you mentioned reserves. Now, at the moment, unused reserves are 14 million. They should be at 5% of our revenue. It should be 24 million. I'm looking at Andrew to correct me, right? So we are off the path somewhat. Our current strategy is to put 3 million a year into reserves. In your assurance, does it get to a point, is your scope where you might say to Conrad, we think you should put more than £3 million a year in, or are you just saying, tick, they're putting £3 million a year? Because we're off our own local government guideline figure with the nuance of the Section 151's equity.
Okay, so I'm gonna break that question into two. So the first is when we're talking about rebuilding assurances, we're talking about the financial statement audit of the balances to say, are they accurate, are they complete? So there's the audit element. I mean, your question's more geared towards what we would do from a value for money perspective, and that will be where our work programme comes in around financial sustainability, and we would be looking at what arrangements the the council ultimately has in place to, I guess, check and challenge those reserve levels and what they should be. I mean, we could make a recommendation and say reserves are very low, and actually you should be at this minimum level in our view, or based on benchmarking to peers. But I would expect that as an organisation, you've already done that benchmarking and you've assessed the degree of risk, and we would be looking to understand what you've done around that, as opposed to advising you on what the level of reserves should be.
Okay, so at the moment they are below the sort of industry standards figure. They are roughly 50% below where they should be. So there'll be a line saying, polite challenge, finance team, you might, for value for money, you might need to review your £3 million a year into reserve, and that'll be a statement somewhere in the account.
It could be, yes. I guess the severity in which our recommendations land will be dependent on actually, have you assessed the risk to that position? Has it been well circulated within the organisation? Has everyone understood, checked and challenged that? Are you managing the risks appropriately? So
you could look into whether the organisation has checked and challenged that methodology.
Yeah, and what we're doing about it.
Okay, yes.
Just to follow on from Councillor Paul, I'm curious, when you say there's only a certain remit of value for money you can look at, so I'm just trying to understand if there are recommendations that you can make, or in terms of the financial sustainability, when you look at the balance sheet, or you look at levels of borrowing, etc. You can't make an assessment on the current levels of, what exactly can you tell us from the information that you have when it comes to value for money and financial sustainability, is basically what I'm asking, I guess.
Yeah, so we would, I guess let's take the last financial year, for example. How we might want to come in terms of what we did around financial sustainability last year, once we made around that. Clearly there were a number of overspend areas, and therefore we would have made reference to that in our reporting. What we would have done though as part of our audit work is, despite the fact that there were overspends, we would be looking at what was the rationale as to how they arose. As an organisation, when did you identify them? What was the reporting on that? What was the remediation action that was being taken? And were those arrangements sufficient such that we didn't think that the finances were being mismanaged? So there were no obvious gaps in the controls, and I think it's just worthwhile noting that the bar for significant weakness is higher than just when we've got an overspend in the year, therefore something must have gone astray as part of that. So we tried to assess and understand the whole situation before landing on, is there anything missing in the arrangements that we've got in place as an organisation? We can comment on that. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I just add on that.
as mentioned a while ago, we don't really necessarily put the amount or the estimates, but we comment on the use of the usable reserves or the continuous use of the usable reserves just to mitigate the overspending, but doesn't really recommend that this is the proper amount for the council.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Okay. May I see by a show of hands the report is noted? Thank you, thank you. Item 10, draft statement of accounts. Oh yes, you've got the pension bit.
Sorry. Unless you would like to take it as well.
No. No, please carry on the pension. Sorry.
I'm I'll be presenting the plan for the pension fund. This will just be quick. So if I may direct you in page 163 and 164 of our report. Basically, these are just overview of our strategy and the risks that we have for the audit. The first three are actually the same as the risks that we have previous years. The first one is on the presumptive risk on management override, which we mentioned a while ago that this is basically the general risks that we have in every audit. So we will perform mandatory procedures related to that risk. The second risk is around the complexity on the valuation of the level 3 investments, which are related basically to the unquoted investment vehicles and then private equity investments of the pension fund. So because this investment doesn't have a quoted value, so we usually look for, or we usually assess and evaluate the estimation involved on this investment. The other risk is on the level 2 investment. So level 2 investment is a mix of those quoted and unquoted instruments. So we included or we assess the risk as a higher inherent risk. And the last risk, which is in page 164 of our general report fact, is a new risk for 2025 audit, which relates to the valuation of the disclosure related to the present value of the promised retirement plan. And just to have a bit of a highlight of our materiality, which is on page 165, we set our planning materiality to be 19 million. That's 1% of the 2024 net assets. We will revisit that materiality once we have the 24-25 accounts. Then for the performance materiality, which is basically the amount we use to determine the extent of our procedures. So we set it at 75% or 40 million. So this is basically the upper end of the range, which is a reflection of the prior year adjustments. We will report all uncorrected adjustments above 1 million. Then in page 182, it includes our timeline for the audit. So we'll be kicking off on the 3rd week of July, but we will conclude in November, same as the timeline of the council. So we will, we are working together with the pension fund to deliver the audit within that time. I'll pause for that and I'll be with any questions.
Councillor, please.
So what happens to the misstatements below?
So basically, those misstatements will not be reported on the audit committee. But if the audit committee has a preference of lower misstatements, we can report those.
So the general way of working would just be if the misstatements below me, then you just wouldn't report them.
Yes, we will not. We don't necessarily include them in our report.
Why? No?
Because we're working on a level of materiality, but if the expectation of the audit committee is different from that, we can include the level of materiality, the level of uncorrected misstatements that you're expecting us to take on the record.
Councillor.
What safeguards are in place to ensure that changes in the actuary assumptions, especially the discounted rates, will present volatility in future funding positions?
Yeah. For that, my understanding is that the council has their specialists, trial specialists, to calculate those assumptions, and then on our part, we're evaluating those assumptions, and if they're different on what the management specialists have. So our work is most likely on the evaluation of what the management specialist has.
Did you have a? Are you happy with that response, or do you want to?
If you want an honest answer, I can say that I'm just trying to get my head around the question answer. Yes, it could be elaborated a little bit.
But yes, if you could try and give a bit.
So we use, so sounds like the pension fund will have their own actuarial specialists that they'll use. We then, EY has their own internal actuarial specialists that they use, and they'll have knowledge of the market and have an expected range for the discount rate. So we would employ our specialists to assess your specialists to say, for example, is the discount rate within a reasonable range based on what we're seeing across the market and what we expect to see. If it's within that range, then we would conclude that, and as Karen said, if it falls outside of that range, then we would come back and have some questions that we'd want to ask around what's the rationale for that. Can we get comfortable with that, or actually do we just disagree with that, and therefore does that present a misstatement in the financial statements in terms of the calculation that's driven by those assumptions? I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of has, but I'm just trying to work out, as a safeguard, is it a meaningful safeguard that for us as a council to be comfortable with?
So your comfort on the assumptions, including financial statements, I would say would come from management in the first instance. So they're management's financial statements, they're your specialists, and therefore your assurance levels should be coming via that process first. As external audit, we would then come in and challenge those assumptions and give you a secondary level of support, assurance, I guess, through our reporting and work on those assumptions.
Okay, I wait.
Okay. Councillor.
Where you've identified these risks like overstated income and like maybe some lease agreements might not be identified, these sort of risks, how do you identify them? Is it based on like the previous year?
It's a mixture. So some of them will be issues that we've experienced previously as part of the audits. The bank reconciliations is one of those, and therefore we've flagged it as a risk this year. The leases is a new accounting standard, and therefore anything that generally when there's something new, there is an increased risk that something may go wrong in that process, and therefore we would identify that route. So there's a bit about understanding you as an organisation mixed with what's going on in the external environment, that we put all of that together and assess what do we think the degree of risk is, and that's where the materiality calculation also comes into play, because we assess it against materiality.
So if you were doing this for any other council, you would also highlight like lease agreements might be a risk as well.
IFRS 16 on leases is in every single one of my audit plans this year.
Any further questions? I think it's really it this time, really.
Thank you.
Okay, may I see by a show of hands this important note? Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Karen. Okay, item 10, draft statement of accounts and the supplementary addenda pack 1. I'm allocating 25 minutes to this item.
Item 10 or item
10. I have accepted this late report, which required additional work ahead of formally being published. Members should have received a hard copy on Thursday evening. I invite Andrew or Mania to briefly introduce the report, please, followed by questions from members.
Right, first, so as experienced members of this committee will know, we bring the annual accounts for you to, draft accounts for you to review before the audit being commences. I'd like to apologise that it was sent out late, as we simply had additional work to do. Unfortunately, we didn't have leases in this draft version. There is a saga behind it, but I'd like to thank the team for rallying around. We were expecting information from a third-party organisation. It didn't arrive, so the team have worked tirelessly late last week through the weekend to get them in the draft accounts, so they are in the publicised version that are on the website. So thanks to the team. Again, the accounts have been a team effort. The whole of finance is pulled together, which is reference to the best value report, which is why they sort of the zero-based budgeting has slipped a bit as well. But I'd like to thank Derek, Ben, and Nigel, particularly my team, for working solidly for the last 2 months to produce this document. Personally, I think it's better than last year's draft version, and it's Conrad's reviewed it, Andrew's reviewed it, and I've been through it as well. So Andrew's gone through the going concern statements, and we've got a going concern note in the accounts, an outer report, which is predominantly drawn from the outer report, which is going to Cabinet in the next couple of weeks. And over to members if you've got any questions.
Any questions, anyone, Steve?
On page 18, like quite a lot of, like the majority of the audits are limited, like their grading status is limited. Why is that? And what can we do to get our grading status a bit higher?
Sorry?
Page 18.
On supplementary.
On supplementary.
Hang on, so you're on item 11, aren't you?
Oh, my God.
Item 10 is the accounts, and then if you move to item 11, so we'll hold that.
I have a question.
Thank you.
Just reading the first couple of pages, the narrative, I'm assuming it's from yourself, Conrad. I just wondered why it's out of date. Obviously, this is just coming to us now. So it talks about the exceptional finance. I just wondered, why does it have to be that it can only be written as of the 31st of March? Or can it be written as it's being published now, with all the assumptions that have happened or not happened?
So I mean, formally it's a narrative statement about the statements of account 24-25. And it is subject to the audit regime, and has to be, the definition here is sort of not inconsistent with what's in the financial statements. So I'm perfectly willing to take comments about whether it would be helpful to sort of provide updates sort of post 31st March. For example, looks like there's a small understanding emerging this year, for instance. But principally, the whole document is about the year in question rather than updating the current position, which we deal with by own means, for example, the dry cabinet report and contain a lot of that information. But if the committee thinks it's helpful to include further information in the narrative summary, I don't have a problem in principle with that. We'll just have to work out a way to do that that doesn't lose here with otherwise all the requirements of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Paul.
Yeah, obviously I'm trying to get my head around the new format. The question really goes back, page 89. I'm not going to name the officer, but I'm going to allude to it. We've got someone here who's paid £250,000 and the person's left the organisation. And the reason why I'm asking is, obviously, there's lots of stuff in the press about GM's financial situation. And we've got a situation here where someone's leaving the organisation and has left. And over the past 2 years on audit, that area has come in for a complete panic. Poor, the reports which have come have been subpar. This person has left, and it relates to the point that the Chief Executive said about Gordon coming to his committee and doing a HR update. But I want to put on record, I'm very uncomfortable with signing off a set of accounts which contains this piece of information. You're not going to do a lot about it because it's a factual piece of information. I think it's very important. I've got a record of my discomfort with what I'm seeing here. And when Gordon comes back, I hope he watches this tape. He comes back and gives a full and frank explanation of why payoffs are being used in lieu of HR procedures. Because the figure is, for those watching, £103,000 pay salary, fees and allowances. Compensation for employment, 136,000. £20,000 approximately into pension contribution, and a final check of 257,660. I think in times of these financial situations of authority, I just feel very uncomfortable in this, and it raises further issues. And the other issue is, why are we only including the head pay of 3 head teachers? Why those 3? Why not the 70 others?
Okay, so let me take those. So firstly, as Councillor Paul says, it's just a factual statement. Just in respect to the numbers read out, I'll just add that note 4, which is referenced on the accounts, in respect to that line, provides some further relevant information. I kind of note your comments, Councillor Paul, that may be subject to follow-up conversation. In terms of the head teachers, at the top of note 32, you see the definition of the employees included, which is basically anyone paid over £150,000 a year, or who is fulfilling a statutory chief officer role, and therefore therefore there are no other head teachers paid more than £150,000 fully disclosed here.
Just a question. Obviously, we thought there are 3 head teachers, bridges that level. Does that trigger a review of salaries amongst our head teachers? Because does this tell us something? Data is information. This is just data. So what does the information tell us? What additional work is being done? Because every school sets its own employment practices and pay levels, right? So we could have outliers out there. And my question is there some sort of overview of that?
Yes, we're exactly to your point. We use the data in these accounts in order to conduct follow-up work. And the point there will be around the justification the school as the employing body has for the decisions that they've made. Yes, in terms of a process, there's not yet concluded.
Can I add? Sorry, just on those 3 head teachers, as a parent and a resident of Newham, I would be wondering, what are those head teachers? Someone's getting £300,000 as a head teacher. As a parent, I would be like, what is this person doing? And why is my head teacher not getting paid that? Or what are they doing for that? Is that school supposed to be better? Or, it just really stands out. These numbers really stand out as a resident of Newham. And you question, and I could imagine anyone looking at this report will question, they are very high amounts.
And that is the purpose of the accounts, to disclose financial information, so that members of the committee, residents and others can form views about what that information tells them. As I say, we have started the process of ensuring that we have the evidence from the school as to why they've taken the decisions that they have done. We expect the accounts are doing what they're supposed to do, which is to disclose the information on which people can then form opinions.
Is that okay, Colson?
It is what it is, but I can imagine as residents, that question, a lot of residents would be wondering, well, whoever reads the report would be wondering, where are those numbers coming from? But I know that what the statement of accounts is for, it's just, that does, generally raise eyebrows.
Okay. Councillor McColman, then we'll come into Councillor Chowdhury after Councillor McColman, please.
Yes, and I'm also curious, so is there a way in which we can get a reporter statement to say what is covered? I suspect if there are quarterlies, it might be that there's a number of schools and the area of responsibility, but we are left to guess what they are. So rather than guessing, can it be given to the committee in terms of a report why they follow this bracket. And whilst I have the floor, can I say, Andrew, to Andrew, I note your final outturn for last year's accounts. It's better than we were told or predicted at scrutiny. So well done. I hope we can say well done in a year's time.
Okay, Councillor Chowdhury, please.
Thank you. My question relates to the private finance initiatives. Well, it seems like we're spending millions of pounds on interest. Interested to know, like, how much these are covered by the regulator for social housing report. Like, what did it break it down into? Which dwellings were funded by PFI schemes, and whether it's possible to make changes to the way those contracts are being run if they're not being done to the standard that was expected.
So as set out in it's note 40, which is on page 107 of the accounts, where you have on the accounts there's a number of PFIs for schools and for housing, and note 40 breaks down the payments that are due over the next 20 years in respect of those in the format described. In terms of the sort of content and structure of the housing PFIs, I don't have all of the precise detail to hand, and of course it is a feature of the PFI contracts that they are relatively inflexible. So, our scope to amend the provision of the service under those would be somewhat limited. That doesn't mean it's not possible for the negotiation of the contractor to achieve outcomes, for example. In terms of the regulator for social housing judgment and whether, I'm fairly sure the judgment didn't differentiate between council properties and the properties the council owns or has access to in the PFI. I'm afraid I do not know, but I can ask the question and find out whether there is a sort of measurable difference in the quality of the stock provided under the PFI, which I think is the heart of your question, isn't it? I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that at hand, but I can find out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just a quick question. I know the in-year spending for audited accounts, it's what's already been spent, right? But there will be some spending commitments that I guess were contractually obligated to forecast, right? And so I'm just asking for assurance that everything that we're expecting to see in these accounts are in them, in terms of maybe its money's not, not particularly spent, but forecast to be, and we're, I guess, contractually obligated to make that expenditure. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Note 20 on page 73 provides detail of construction contracts, for example, a little detail about the future cost of those. Note 40 that we've also been discussing on PFIs. But you're right to say that the accounts principally about what but it does contain information about future commitments and obligations.
Councillor Lukaku, please.
Thank you. Just looking at the balance sheet, how are we managing the reduction in the earmarked reserves, and what are the plans to rebuild our financial resilience going forward whilst not losing out on statutory services?
So we've discussed already the planned contribution to reserves, the budgeted contribution to reserves of 3 million plus per year to build back the general fund reserve over time. On your broader point, this is the dilemma that local authorities up and down the country are facing. How you continue to provide statutory prescribed services maybe even some discretionary services too that the council thinks are valuable. And government talks a lot about preventative services, for example, something that it expects councils to do, even though they're not quite statutory. How you continue to manage that without funding to meet those obligations is a real challenge. Roughly at the moment, a bit less than one council, fewer than one council in 10 is in the exceptional financial support programme. We've spoken about this deficit on special educational needs that government has legislated to enable councils to pretend it doesn't exist. Not even to enable councils to pretend that it doesn't exist, but more or less require them to pretend that it doesn't exist. If it were not for that legislation, the number of relevant councils in exceptional financial support would be something like half. So this is a massive sector-wide problem. If I knew how to get our expenditure down to the amount of funding provided and still meet statutory obligations to the levels provided, we would have done so. These are just massive problems for the council. I can't really tell you that we, as we've set out in the budget report, we do not yet have an answer to a problem of that scale.
Okay.
I wish we did.
Chair, I have something.
Yes, that's fine.
Forgive me, I'm Conrad, and it wasn't you that said this, I believe it was Andrew, but earlier on in our conversations on a different item, I'm sure it was said that our budget as it currently stands, and by the end of the year we will not go overspend. I'm sure that's what I heard. I might not have heard that. Did I hear that? But listening to what you just said, Conrad.
Shall I clarify it? Yeah,
Yes,
I know exactly where you go. Yeah. No, I'm sorry, I spoke across you.
Listening to what you just said, so you used the example about the special needs funding.
Yeah.
And in my mind, so we know we have a deficit. We've been holding a deficit for at least 5 years. But those needs don't go. So how are they going to be resolved? Not even resolved. Resolved is not the right word. How are they going to be paid for going forward, even though we've still got a deficit? So that's what, like, in my mind, I always talk about don't spend what you don't have. But the needs are the needs. We're a local authority. So I listening to the narrative earlier, which I'm sure I heard, that the budget would be balanced. Listening to the narrative around temporary accommodation and us knowing better what the level of needs are and how we're going to pay for that. Are we saying here today in this space that there is assurances that we will not be £1 overspent in temporary accommodation, £1 overspent in special educational needs, £1 overspent in children's social care? Is that what we're saying?
No, so let me pick up 2 or 3 related points there. So the budget for 25-26 includes, in round numbers, £50 million of exceptional financial support. So asset disposals, the processes of those used to cover day-to-day expenditure. So including that, our forecast at the end of this quarter of the year is for a bit of an underspend against that budget. You could, if you prefer, say, well, that's a small underspend. We've got 50 million of exceptional financial support. So if you want to describe that as a sort of overspending conventional terms of 47 or whatever million, you could think of it that way if you prefer. But the budget that we've set our forecast today is for an overall underspend against that. That doesn't mean that each individual budget line is underspent. There are ups and downs within that, of course there are. But overall, we're underspending against that. To the sort of wider point about special educational needs or indeed other budgets, in my personal view, the solution to this government has got 2 choices really. It could increase funding for local authorities to meet the needs it specifies in legislation. Quite how it can do that at current tax levels, or indeed tax levels that anyone's prepared to vote for, is unclear.
Yeah.
or government could legislate to say that, you know, we will not set the same level of statutory duties, because that's what making it affordable means, doesn't it? I don't imagine either of those are particularly enviable choices, and that's why government is finding, if I may, you know, some of the choices that it's having to confront very difficult. But ultimately, that has to be the solution, isn't it? Either you increase funding to meet duties you set out, or you reduce those duties. Those are issues for government to resolve. We're just managing the situation we have and the obligations placed on us, and a sort of, you know, if I can put it this way, the sort of irresistible force of, you know, legislative requirements that we have to meet, and an immovable object of not enough money to do that. And at some point, government is going to have to resolve that contradiction. That's got to be a national issue, not just a local issue. And we are one of many councils in the same position.
Okay. Just listening to what you said in regards to the £50 million of exceptional finance, I guess one of the things that jerks me is we've been here before in regards to things happening that we don't expect. So let's just say in the foreseeable future we have another pandemic, or we go to war, for instance. How would we, you know, I'm not asking necessarily for assurances, because I don't think it would be fair to ask you that here and now, but thinking about the budget that, you know, the budget we have here is great and it's done and it's dusted, but going forward, and it would be naive of us not to think about going forward, even though there is a line in here about going forward. Can this council withstand a pandemic of a World War III?
I think that's quite a big question for the accounts of one local authority.
But it matters to the people here.
You know, the depletion in reserves are what get you through situations like that. The depletion in those clearly limit our ability to deal with shocks. You know, no question. You know, that's the point of reserves. So yes, our ability to cope with, you know, World War III or another pandemic is less than it would have been previously. Having said that, if you think back to the experience of the pandemic, I can't talk of the experience of a world war, but the experience of the pandemic, government did provide a lot of funding for that. You know, there were issues on the distribution of it that didn't work, you know, well for anyone, but, you know, so a local authority would properly expect, you know, like global incidents like that, government to step in and do something, and not just leave it to individual local authorities. So I don't disagree with your point. You know, that's why we say that the reserves are less than they really ought to be, and that's why we are trying to look at the situation.
Okay, last 2 points.
A quick question to you, Conrad. So, is it fair to say that our budget gap for the MTFS period is greater than our earmark reserves?
So the gap is, so hang on, the gap that we have not met for 26, 7 and 27, 8 would be about 130 million, that's right, isn't it, in round numbers. And the total usable reserves are greater than that. So, you know, the straightforward answer to your question is no, that would not be the case. Clearly, if the council did nothing and didn't identify further savings and all the rest of it, the situation would become more and more acute. You only need to look at some other councils, you know, in London and elsewhere, where, you know, this sort of contradiction has, you know, forced them to a position where they're not selling assets to meet day-to-day expenditure, they're just borrowing to meet day-to-day expenditure. And the year after that, they borrow to meet day-to-day expenditure and the interest on last year's borrowing, and you know, this is patently unsustainable. You know, and some of those councils, you know, Slough, for instance, one might reasonably say, well, the architects are going misfortune. Other councils that would claim that, you know, no one has identified anything they've done particularly wrong, they just cannot meet duties placed on them with funding made available.
No, sorry, councillor, and then councillor, because it's coming up to time and we still have one major agenda item, so please.
I'm just curious because obviously my sense of this conversation has been quite counterfactual, right? In that it's, the kind of if and buts of what government could do or should do. I'm thinking about what's within our remit of what we could do. And even in regards to, for instance, SEN, we know that the statutory override that allows you to discount those deficits end early next year. And there's an assumption, obviously, because the government would not want a third of councils to go bankrupt immediately, that extends, etc. But I don't think that was clarified in the answer for Councillor Lee Parkway. So I just want to...
Yeah, so let me just update on that one. So government is consulting on extending that statutory override to March 28.
Okay.
I think an incredibly strong expectation that they will agree that. Candidly, privately, I quite have to lay a bet that in the run-up to March 28, they'll consult on extending it to March 30 or something like that. I mean, unless apparently there's a white paper coming on it, maybe that will deal with the issues. But they have a £5 billion gap nationally and growing. This is a sort of major issue for government to try and solve. But in the very short term, they're extending that statutory override.
Thank you, Conrad. Councillor, please.
Okay, I mean, I actually had two questions, but looking at the time, maybe one of the questions possibly answered, but I wanted clarity on it. But I will want to go back on the capital program slippage. There was 270 million of slippage on the capital program. Do we need a revised approach to profiling and regularity assurance at the project inception stage?
Well, we've had some suggestions with that regard from the council already this evening. So I wasn't sure whether I was to review and look at that as part of budget setting for next year.
Could I have a follow-up?
One quickly and then we'll
all right. Also about use of capital receipts to fund revenue. How sustainable is it to continue relying on capital receipts to support revenue budgets? And are the current asset disposal plans realistic in the current market?
Well, I mean, it's not sustainable. The budget report says so. This is not a financially sustainable strategy. We could make it work for at least the next 2 or 3 years. There's quite a good asset base. And so far, we've been successful in identifying disposals at, on average or above, the estimated market value. So I think it's a very legitimate concern. Market evidence is, we're able to sell the assets, generate the receipts for now. That could change. I've never pretended that this is a good financial strategy. It's better than the alternative of borrowing for day-to-day expenditure. And unless and until. Sorry, I don't want to make this sound as though it's nothing to do with it. Of course, there's lots that we need to continue trying to do, get back towards our budget. But I do think there is a weight of evidence out there at the scale of the problems in the sector. This is not just an issue for you.
Thank you, Conrad. I'm going to draw this item to a close because we still have another agenda item, so that means we're going to need to go into extra time. The committee is recommended to note the draft statement of accounts for 24-25 and approve its submission to external audit. Now, I see by a show of hands, is that agreed?
Chair, we got 2 actions from the section. One was the HR, a little bit earlier on, and the second one was education, doing a report to the committee about the teacher salaries.
Yes. Okay. To check the 3 the accounts, are they managing multiple schools, academies,
Yes.
to sort of justify the salary in essence? Okay. Item 11, draft annual government statement, supplementary agenda item pack 2.
I'm sorry, I think the council feels that there wasn't a proper vote.
I don't think we voted.
Did you not vote? Sorry.
Sorry,
Interrupted me just as I was doing that.
Sorry.
May I? Yeah. Because you asked for the
Awful of
2.
me.
You did because you asked for the 2 action
I
points.
apologise.
May I see by a show of hands, is that agreed? Thank you.
Chair,
Sorry, do we need to extend standing?
We will do.
I second that, Chair.
You can do it now. It's at 11, it's at 9:30, but it's probably more comfortable to do it in between the items.
Yes, okay then. So members, under rule 8.2, I'm interrupting proceedings because this meeting has lasted just under 2.5 hours. As business is not concluded, I will now take a vote on whether the meeting will continue. All those in favour of continuing the meeting, please raise your hands. That's agreed. The majority is approved, so we will extend the meeting to ensure we can cover the final agenda points. So, item 11, draft annual governance statement, supplementary agenda item action. I'm allocating 20 minutes. Kirk Davey, please briefly introduce the report, and this will be followed by members' questions.
Thank you, Chair. So the annual governance statement is a statutory statement that's prepared by the council. It clearly outlines its effectiveness of the internal system controls. I just wanted to remind everyone that this is a draft statement coming here for comments that is finalized in September. It normally follows the annual statement of accounts. The report before you details some examples of our good, what we call governance arrangements, following CIFCA guidance. And there's a couple of examples of that there in 1.4 that outlines what it looks like. A couple of ones wanted to pull out in the CIFCA guidance. Section C, for example, clear outcomes. We have a corporate plan. There's annual money, shows some other laudable projects that showcase some of our good governance principles. You know, earlier on today about examples of organizational capacity, capability, that's outlined in the example in E. And F, obviously, adhering to our transparency. So we reported out what we call significant governance issues over there in the report. So it's a new format, hopefully it's clearer in terms of outlining the difference between those things. We've also given an update on our governance issues from last year and some new ones we reported this year. So I'll pause there and I'll take any questions.
Councillor Newport,
Thank you, let's draw our attention to page 25 first. I note in the section, sorry, I'm just going back to my notes. I note that in the section which refers to legal governance, Kerr, obviously you presented the report, but I guess, is there anybody here from legal?
Well, Arnold is, but I think perhaps if you ask the question, we could provide you with an answer.
In the section, it talks around, sorry, I can't actually move the note. Anyway, it talks about the council, sorry, I need to cancel. So the council, a claim against the council and it being lodged with the Employment Tribunal. My question actually is, what do you mean by robustly defended the claim, since the claim was not defended in court? And then also, surely the narrative here, the issue and the update should have mention of the payment that was made. I'm trying to be careful what I'm saying. Surely should have mentioned the payment made, given this is supposed to be about governance. Surely the reader needs to have the full facts. And then, and I guess my question is basically, why is there no mention of the amount? And will this be rectified?
Well, I hear that. I mean, this is meant to be a summary of the issue, so it's not meant to go into each and every detail of it. It's factually correct that the claim was settled, and as your question demonstrates, many more facts around this are already well in the public domain. So I would say for a document where we're trying to summarise, quite manage to summarise the four issues on one side of a form, it's meant to be a summary. So I hear the point about wanting to add more detail to it. I mean, I think there's probably more detail that could be added to all of these. It is meant to just be a summary, and the issues are well known and are in the public domain already. So my view would be that what's in there is correct and reasonable summary. I hear your point.
Supplementary.
Yes.
I'll take a bolder approach. I think the figure should be in there. I'll be very uncomfortable if that figure isn't in there. We just had an agenda item where we looked at people's salaries. I was able to mention the payoff which a member of the staff had. If I had the courtesy to do that, we should be fully transparent. It was 30,000 plus VAT. That figure needs to go in here. And actually, you know, I can draft as best as anyone. That update is rather too long. It looks like somebody trying to, you know, use butter to cover a crack. So what I would suggest, perhaps, if it's going to come back in September, that it's redrafted. I volunteer myself to the legal team if they want some drafting assistance, because I can draft, as you know. The figure of £37,000, inclusive of that, needs to go in here. The question which Councillor Lee Parkway said, what does robustly mean? It was not defended in a tribunal or a court. It was settled within this building. That doesn't mean to me robust. Might be semantics. I want to put on the record, but I totally agree with my councillor colleague. This is not a draft I'll be happy to sign off. And this is about transparency. My final point is this. I was able, in 2 agenda items, to query the payoff of a senior member of staff. I was able to query the salaries of teachers. Under that principle, me as an elected representative of this borough should be fully transparent with my residents. That figure needs to go in. My colleagues might have a different view, but if that view is different, I will ask, as I did in the last audit meeting, that my comments are accurately recommended, and I refuse to sign this government statement off. I speak as a former chair of school.
So, look, I hear that. I mean, the audit committee is being asked to note the draft, and therefore by implication to comment on difficulties, which you have done. I would still stand by the point that just adding information into it that's already clearly in the public domain, unlike the other items you referenced, where that information was not in the public domain, there is a distinction between the two. But the point of having it here is to get comments on the draft. The final version is some way of being finalised with further time for the conclusion of the account, and that would need to be done by. So the point is, to enable the discussion here, I hear the comments made, also explain why we've taken the view that we have, but it's a draft for discussion.
Yes, Councillor Keys.
So just for clarification, I don't think it's whether you agree or not, of whether it should be in there, given this, I just think it's about specificity, just being specific, given that in other sections, which were also summaries, you were specific. The EFS amount that Newham got, well, that's a specific amount of 67.2 million, which is in the same summary document. If there is some pecuniary aspect to the legal governance section, then in 2 words, it could be in there too. I think that's all people are saying.
No, I hear the comment. As I say, it's a draft that's here for comment and in some way from the
Councillor, please.
Just an observation following on from Councillor Poole and Councillor Honourable. I mean, looking at the way it's drafted, that particular subject that we are on, legal and governance, and taking experience from my past role in litigation and settlement of employment tribunal claims, the drafting is actually inappropriate, because I'm assuming if there has been a settlement, it's assuming it comes off the back of a court free, which usually has some kind of non-disclosure clause. So the way to bring this out in an audit committee would be to looking at the figures of what the settlement figures was, for course we're looking at the accounts, but it wouldn't have needed to specify the individual in line with what the Cot 3 conditions would have been. I haven't seen those drafts, but knowing how they are drafted, I'm certain that there would have been certain clauses, and I'm concerned that it may have potentially breached those conditions without me looking at those drafts. But Councillor Poole and Councillor Novo does have a point. We need to know the figures. And the problem you probably have is putting the figures, identifying the claimant and identifying the defendants. It could compromise whatever's in that country. And again, it's on assumption of past experience, based on past experience.
I think in relation to this, legal needs to clarify what is suitable. As you commented, there's probably a non-disclosure agreement, and I think the issue is that statement there, the council robustly defended the claim, which was settled without admission of liability through mediation. I think that is probably the nub. So I think you do need to look at how that is phrased in there. And then if it is possible to have full transparency to say that a settlement was made of X amount, that then enables transparency, because if you've had in the statement of accounts senior officers' salaries and one officer left the council with a payoff of 138k, this is no different, especially as you've mentioned, it's been mentioned, things are in the public domain. We know the key applicant, not concerned about the other bit, but it already says by the executive mayor. So you're not really holding back anything to anyone. If there's been a payment made, it should be declared. If it's not, then you need to state, due to the non-disclosure agreement that was made, we are unable to make the amount known, but a payment was made. And I think that enables fairness on all parts. The amount is kept hidden, for want of a better word, but you acknowledge the process that was taken.
Chair, I think I should declare an interest because I was a part of a 5-member consultative group.
Yes.
And seeing that this discussion is going on,
yes,
I have declared interest.
That's fine. But I think because, as Councillor here has stated, this is a legal matter and there may have been this non-disclosure agreement which doesn't allow, that then just needs to be specified. So it's clearly stated the reasons for non-disclosure is because of X.
Can I make a point of clarification
Yes.
of my query? My query was that if this was worded properly, we could have had digits, because it would have been, it would not have any bearing on any breaches of the contract. If we had not identified who the individuals were. But I haven't seen the draft, so I can't comment, but we could have had the figures to balance the vote.
Yes, as I said, I want legal Kirk to go back and to confirm a better phrasing of this, because this is a key issue. And so this doesn't give justice to what has happened. You don't need to give, I hear you, Councillor Ball, you don't need to give the details, but this needs to be rephrased in a better way to enable transparency on a very, very serious issue. So this does not do it, and I think the committee feels that. So you need to address that.
Thank you.
Councillor Paul.
Chair, just a point of information in terms of what's in the public domain. All councillors were sent an email with the figure in. Local government, I think it's local government lawyer, MGA, the Municipal Journal, Prospect Magazine, the Standard had the information. So what I'm saying, Kurt, I wouldn't want you perhaps to come back with a legally typed document and for us to say, it's all, you can't do this because of the NDA. The NDA refers to the specific terms of what was said. So it is in the public domain. The issue is about the robust of the words. That needs to be, either you can take it out or you can do it. And also there was an admission of liability in there of some party, let's say. So
Okay, Councillor Ball, yes, we're going to, Kirk understands this needs to be redrafted. For September, it needs to be redrafted because this is not sufficient. Okay, so we'll move on because we're under the clock now. So, Councillor, please.
I wanted to ask my original question about the audits being limited.
Yes,
and
yes.
then also my second question is on page 22, it talks about this early start group limited company. So is that the same as the early start education limited? Is that the same company? Is it the only owned one or is it one of the other ones?
So the early start education was a company that closed down, and early start education is a company that's limited. So it's the They're two companies, two separate companies.
They're separate, okay.
Yeah.
And then it talks about how the Early Start Group Limited one is going through voluntary liquidation arrangements. Are there any more financial implications that we need to know about? Do you need to disclose anything more to us? What other financial implications?
It's going through its normal liquidation process, and if there's more information, we'll present that as part of reports to the company.
So has there actually been action maybe?
You can come back with more specificity if you want.
And Kurt, can you respond to Councillor where she was asking about that you didn't, you need to ask that again.
Okay, yes. The question again was about the
audit.
Can you just give the question again?
Okay, so the majority of the audits are limited, their status is limited. What can we do to make it reasonable or even substantial? What can we do to make them better?
So I think there's the auditor's opinion, which is contained in there, that kind of outlines some of the key actions. And I think one of the things we'll be looking at over the next year is about how we take forward those actions and what we report back to audit committee. I think there's going to be some learning about some of those limited assurance reports. And then we can probably discuss with the audit team about a bit more detail and any special ones of interest. So I think there's a full detail about some of those priority actions that are currently outstanding and why some of them have limited assurance, some of which obviously missing information was needed to be provided for. I think I note the points around some limited ones, but in terms of your question, that's going to be picked up with the audit team about how next year we start to profile and learn from this year's action.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
So on page 39, it talks about the priorities. So there's 14 priority ones, which are fundamental things that we need to know about. So where can we put the list of all these priorities?
We can make that in.
Okay.
And they will be reported to the audit committee during the year, so we can just collate all of those.
Pauline, did you get?
Yes, 14 priorities to see the list of the 14.
Okay. Any further questions?
I do have another one.
Carry on.
On page 24, it talks about the local area partnerships arrangements lead to inconsistent experiences and outcomes for children and young people with special educational needs. So I just wanted to know why these children having inconsistent experiences.
That's about the local send inspection. I would have to come back to you on that one because that's about offset inspection. So I don't have that level of detail to hand, but I can happily take an action.
Please.
Because it says that the council thinks that this is a fair judgment. So if you understand that it's a fair judgment, I want to know why.
Right, yeah, okay. I can take that one.
Okay, any further questions on this? Yeah.
Thank you. I want to say a big thanks to Artemis to help put this together, so I'll give her a shout out. And it was a group counselling efforts. Artemis over here.
No, I see, but I thought, are you pointing to somebody? Sorry.
I'm really sorry. I mean, I'm very new to this and I'm just going around all the papers. I'm trying to stay focused that I'm actually in the right agenda item.
No, because you were late, you missed the fact that I said for new members, no question is not.
My pass wasn't.
No worries, but no question is not reasonable. Anything you need to ask.
If it's been answered.
No, please ask.
Tell me. So I want to ask a question, I'm hoping I am on the right item, around risk maturity.
Yes, this is exactly.
While we have moved from risk naive to risk defined, how will we monitor whether the revised risk framework is embedded in frontline service delivery?
I think there's probably two ways in which we can probably deal with it. So you have the 3 lines of defense, which is kind of what we use, senior management, your audit plans, and obviously your third-party risk. I think there's been, from audit committee in the past, a greater focus on risk. So we have a corporate risk register, which we all control, and inherent risk registers, which we work with. I think we are improving in our grasp and understanding and knowledge of how we manage risk. I think we'll probably report back to this committee going forward in terms of ensuring that we are actually dealing with some of the risks that have been raised. I think there was a request for additional resources in the risk profile, and I think that's been delivered. So I think it's a journey, and I think we continue to pick up on that journey and improve on that journey. And I think, to your question, bringing those kind of risks to the audit committee is probably one of the ways in which we monitor and we can test that program.
Okay. Councillor Newport.
Thank you. Kurt, and forgive me for my ignorance. I'm just wondering, in regards to this governance report, how does it compare to the previous governance reports? Is there the same issue? Is there any same issues that have come up? I'm asking because I don't know the answer to this. So I guess my question is how better are we now compared to 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, or have we got the same issues over many years? Maybe you might not be able to answer that straight off the back, but maybe is there an answer you can give to us?
Sorry, I can probably start. I think I will be here for 10 years, so I can talk about more recently. I think if you look at our significant governance issues from before and this year, for example, previous times we had issues with contracts stuff. We're not seeing that coming again, so you can say the organisation has learned from that. We picked up on things around housing standards before the regulator came in, so we're broadly aware of it. Obviously, the regulator came and made an assessment. So I would say that we pick up, as an organisation, we pick up on these issues. I would say as an organisation, we learn our lessons from these issues. Obviously, an organisation of this size would have varying issues occurring over the years. And I think if you look at what we've picked up this year, we're reporting on things like the best value or things around our budgets. And you'd see that we're not picking up what you would call operational big risks that are crippling the council in that sense. I think that we've moved ahead. Obviously, like I said before, it's a massive organisation, so multiple things are happening at once. And I think the assurance is that we'll hopefully pick this up before it's picked up an external party. And I think that's probably a way to test these things.
Sure. Last final question.
So just off the back of that, I guess one of the things that kind of get me is workforce and culture. I know that since I've been in this organisation since 2018, we have been on an ongoing transformation around culture and workforce. And so it surprises me to see this up in this document, but also to see it in the best value, to see it in the peer review, to see it in all the various different inspections when we've been on a journey for such a long time, and have, for instance, the heart values. But it concerns me when I'm reading through documents and it talks about EDI, for instance. This is new. And I'm a little bit, I don't know, maybe I'm asking for reassurances. I guess the question is how have we got here? With an organisation that's been constantly, and maybe it's the turnover of chief execs, maybe it's the turnover of corporate management. I don't know what the actual answer is. I can make an assumption, but the fact that we have issues around our culture and workforce, reading the document, talks to workforce strategy, the first workforce strategy. I remember being in a room quite a few years ago and was told that there was a workforce strategy. So I often when I sit and read documents, I think, what am I being told and is it the truth? And that's why my question was, how does this compare from the last X amount of years? Because I just can't understand how an organisation of this size in this borough, and it's not like we don't know the borough we live in, that actually we're faced with some of the issues that I see from an organisational point of view. I'll leave it there. I don't know if you want to answer or not.
I'm going to leave that one.
Okay.
Let's get these ones in because we really are on the clock now, so please.
Page 40 talks about some risks. So it talks about application caseloads that are not being delivered. And going back to the first quarter of 2024-2025, it talks about payments payments are taken outside of the feeding system. That's going back to 2023. It talks about 49 unactioned new referrals. So these are things that are not from today, it's been going on. So what have we been doing today? What's happened? What's the progress so far?
So that's part of what we're talking about that we'll bring back. So that was the detail of some of the audits that were carried out. So to have that granular level of detail, but thinking the action I've taken, you can come back. So you can see that's development management, that's client affairs, and those two that you referenced. And I think the detail behind where we are with some of these things we can bring back, and I can also bring back the service needs in front of that if you want some more details to answer some of those broad questions. But I think the important thing is that we've carried out this audit, we've outed some of these issues, obviously for everyone to see. And like I said, it's a draft document. I would hope by September there will be some kind of, as we finalize this document, some kind of movement. But I'll take an action to bring back some of these service leads down to a decision.
Thank you.
A quick one, yes. I concur with Councillor Lee Parkway in terms of workforce and organizational culture. And Cork, is there a method to test or deep down in the organization does the workforce aware of the cultural changes? I get it, the top 500 people at the top may know about the culture changes that we are trying to implement. My guess is it's not reaching down to the people that really need to know about the culture change, and with Sean at the top. By the time those people get their feet under the table, they're gone. And therefore, because the mayor started talking about this in 2018, we're still talking about it now. And I guess, and I said it before, it's not reaching to the people that it really need to meet to make certain that the culture changes are taking place.
Okay, Kirk, I'm going to ask you
So we need to measure that.
to follow that one up, because this is the final question. If you can give a written response, because that is ongoing, it's in the best value notice, so it should be at the top of your head. So this is the final question, please.
Thank you, I do appreciate that. I don't know why, I feel like asking a lot of questions.
No.
I know there's been a lot of discussion around the best value notice, and I know this is a draft document, but I have to raise caution. This is not a question, I do have a question though. It's just an observation about the tone on ongoing governance challenges. I just think that maybe you need to revisit, we talk about best value notice, and then we talk about the AGS notes abroad. For example, I'm just giving one example. The AGS notes a broadly positive direction in governance, but NEOM is under best value notice. It's just the language and the tone. I think it should be more not misleading, but
more congruent.
So I think we can revisit that. But the main actual question is, could we receive an update on or timeline on when we can expect to resolve the historic weaknesses in contract monitoring and procurement highlighted in the earlier audits?
Yeah, that's right. I can bring that back as well. Thank you very much. Well, just if I may,
yes.
One, I think there is, I have to say, it's kind of linked to Councillor Lee Parker's question. There is a positive movement, and in some ways it recognises, and it's in the fact that we're out for some of these issues earlier. Obviously, it's still a journey, and I think even the best value, I think the Chief Executive said earlier, they took it off what they read externally. Now that we've come into the organisation and see our body of work, we remain to see what the updates will then be. So I think that's why the tone is broadly understanding as an internal document. We've done a lot of this work, but it's obviously how that comes to out after this process.
I think you probably just have to put the context. Although there's been improvements, there are still some way to go. That is culminated in the ministry saying you're not meeting the best value duty. So that has to be acknowledged. It's a reality.
Okay.
So yes, praise movement, but this is ongoing. The change for culture within the organisation is ongoing for many years. And Councillor McCollum, it takes a long time, and I personally don't see much action for it to trickle down to the lower levels. But anyway, I'm not going to stop. But you understand, it's not just about the positive. The reality is we have this notice which says there are failings in the organisation, so you have to make reference to that. Okay, so final. The committee is asked to note the draft report. May I see by a show of hands, is that agreed?
No.
Okay, one abstention. Thank you.
Subject to draft changes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
All right, thank you.
Okay, do we put a hand up?
Yeah, can I ask a question, Chair? No, of you.
Of me?
Yeah.
I'm going to say subject.
No, so we got to get the draft statement coming back.
Yes.
But that's only you decide what's in that draft, is that correct?
No.
So it comes back from you,
To the committee.
it goes back to the committee.
Yes.
And we decide.
Yes.
We decide, this place. Can you put it on the record? We decide, that's correct?
So the final version, the responsibility for signing that statement is with the Chief Executive and with the Council, right? But the Audit Committee will part of providing, as you have done, challenge to the place
If there is a divergence of views on the content of that draft. How is that resolved?
It won't be us, as Conrad said, there's two other parties that have precedence on it. We are reviewing and can give our comments. If they're accepted, but if they're not, we can't insist. But anyway.
It's also subject to the external audit, although there are.
Yes, it's not just us. Armistice, did you have a quick point?
I think it's been covered, thank you, Chair.
All right then. Item 12, year ahead forward plan. Members will note that I've cancelled the 8th of September meeting as the items due for discussion, the final statement of accounts, will be coming to the February 2026 meeting. This is because of the backstop date for the accounts has changed. However, we are using the September date for a short online training session with regard to how to consider internal audit reports. This will start at 6:30 and last for an hour. In addition, there was a query in respect of the regulator social housing report and whether it was best considered by overview and scrutiny or audit and governance. I've spoken to the chair of overview and scrutiny, and this will stick with overview and scrutiny for the time being. The clerk will remove it from the forward plan. For the next, are there any questions on the report? Is there anything missing that should be added? I will take that as the reported. What quickly, please?
I had two observations, but because when you say quick, it just makes me a bit.
We're under the clock. We've got 5 to 10.
All right.
Please.
Thematic deep dive sessions. Can the forward plan include deep dives on areas like agency staffing, commercial entities, and contract performance, especially those repeatedly flagged in governance review and audit? And the other one is follow-up reporting on governance issues. Can the committee receive biannual updates on the significant governance issues identified in the AGS with progress with RAG rated and risk evaluated?
Yes.
On the deep dive, agency staff, contract, performance, and what was the other one? The second one?
Especially those repeatedly flagged in governance reviews and audit.
Okay. Item 13, date of next meeting. The date of the next meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee is scheduled for Wednesday, 16th of July 2025. We will be held here again at Dockside Building. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
That concludes tonight's business. I wish good night to everyone who has been online and watching on YouTube. Members, please wait for the clerk to vote.